Hachette Digital presents I Am Ozzy by Ozzy Osbourne, read by Frank Skinner. My father always said I would do something big one day. I've got a feeling about you, John Osbourne, he'd tell me after he'd had a few beers. You're either going to do something very special or you're going to go to prison. And he was right, my old man. I was in prison before my 18th birthday. Burglary. That's what they sent me down for in the end. Breaking and entering and stealing goods to the value of £25. I went to court and I was fined 40 quid by the judge. My old man wouldn't help me out. You need to be taught a fucking lesson. The judge sentenced me to 3 months in Winson Green for non-payment of fines. I almost shit my pants when they told me I was going to prison, to be honest with you. I was born in 1948 and grew up at number 14 in the middle of a row of terraced houses on Lodge Road in Aston. My father, John Thomas, was a toolmaker and worked nights at the GEC plant on Whitton Lane. When my dad got home in the morning after a night's work at GEC, my mum, Lillian, would start her shift at the Lucas factory. It was a grinding fucking routine, day in, day out. I was the 4th kid in my family and the first boy. My 3 older sisters were Jean, Iris and Gillian. I don't know when my parents found time to go at it with each other, but before long I also got 2 younger brothers, Paul and Tony. So there were 6 kids at 14 Lodge Road. It was pandemonium. Jean, the eldest, was almost like another mom to me. I don't know what I would have done without Jean, to be honest with you, because I was a very nervous kid. Fear of impending doom ruled my life. When my dad was sleeping through the day, I'd start freaking out that he was dead, and I'd have to poke him in the ribs to make sure he was still breathing. He wasn't too fucking pleased about that, I can tell you. My dad was strict, but he never beat me, or locked me up in the coal house or anything. The worst I'd get was a smack if I did anything bad, like when I tried to kneecap my grandfather with a hot poker while he was asleep. But my dad did have big rows with my mother, and I later learned that he slapped her around. I'd hear them shouting, but I never knew what any of it was about. Money, I suppose. He was a good guy, my old man. Simple, old-fashioned. Physically, he was built like a featherweight, and he wore these thick black Ronnie Barker glasses. A good man. I really miss him. One thing I didn't inherit from the old man was my addictive personality. My dad would get to the working men's club, have a few beers and a laugh with the boys from the factory, and come home singing Show Me the Way to Go Home. My dad wasn't the only one in our family who liked to sing when he'd had a few. My mum and my sisters did too. Jean would come home with these Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley records, and they'd all learn them and organise these little family shows on a Saturday night. The first time I ever performed was at one of those Osbourne get-togethers. I sang Cliff Richard's Living Doll, which I'd heard on the radio. Never in a million years did I think I'd end up making a career out of singing. I hated school. The only thing I ever looked forward to at Prince Albert Junior's was the bell ringing at 4 o'clock. I felt like I was a born loser. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I found out about my dyslexia and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And when I got the piss taken out of me, like when I had to read out loud, I'd try to think up all sorts of insane things to do to make the other kids laugh. For as long as I can remember, people called me Ozzy at school. It was just a nickname for Osbourne, but it fitted my clownish personality. After Prince Albert Junior's, I went to Birchfield Road Secondary Modern in Perry Bar. Funnily enough, the only thing I got gold stars for at Birchfield Road was heavy metal work. I suppose that was because my dad was a toolmaker and it came naturally to me. My favourite prank in heavy metal work was to get a penny and spend 3 or 4 minutes making it really hot with a blowtorch and then leave it on Mr. Lane's desk so that he'd see it and pick it up out of curiosity. First you'd hear, "Whoa!" Then, "Osbourne, you little bastard!" The old hot penny trick. Priceless, man. I got bullied for a while when I was younger. Eventually I worked out a way to get around the bullies. I found the biggest kid in the playground and clowned around until I made him laugh. The bullies left me well alone once we became pals. One kid at school who never beat me up was Tony Iommi. He was in the year above me and everyone knew him because he could play the guitar. He was incredible. Just one of those naturally talented guys. It didn't take me long to realise that my folks had less dough than most other families. We certainly weren't having holidays in Mallorca every summer, not with 6 little Osbournes to clothe and feed. I never even saw the sea until I was 14. There were other ways I could tell we were skint, like the squares of newspaper we had to use instead of toilet roll, and the fact that my mum never bought me underwear. It's not that life at 14 Lodge Road was bad, but it was hardly fucking domestic bliss either. My mother was no Delia Smith for a start. One time my mum made me some boiled egg sandwiches for a packed lunch. I opened up the bread and there was cigarette ash and bits of shell in it. Cheers, Mum. I wasn't exactly a Romeo at school. Most chicks thought I was insane. But I remember when I got my merry end away for the first time. I was at a dance in a pub in Aston. There was an older girl there and she danced with me for a bit. Then she took me back to her parents' house and shagged the shit out of me all night. So the next day, I went running back to her house like a dog sniffing around the old pole again. But she just blurted out, "What the fuck do you want?" "Oh, how about another shag?" "Fuck off!" That was the end of our beautiful romance. I was 15 when I left school, and what did I get to show for my 10 years in the British education system? Nothing. Not a single qualification. I decided on plumbing because at least it was a trade. I didn't realise that plumbers work their arses off in the middle of winter when all the pipes burst. So you spend most of your time bending over a manhole when it's -5 degrees, freezing your fucking nutsack off. I didn't last a week. My next job was at an industrial plant which made car parts, and I was in charge of a big fucking degreasing machine. You'd get baskets full of bits, rods, springs, levers, whatever, and you drop them into this vat of bubbling chemicals which clean them. There was a sign on top of the machine which said, "Extreme hazard. Protective mask must be worn at all times. Never lean over the tank." I remember asking what was in the vat, and someone told me it was methylene chloride. I thought to myself, I wonder if you can get a buzz off that stuff. So one day, I pull down my mask and lean over the tank, just for a second, and I go, whoa. It was like sniffing glue, times a fucking 100. So every morning, I started taking a whiff of the old degreasing machine. It was a lot cheaper than going down the pub. Then I started doing it twice a day. Then every 5 fucking minutes. They found me slumped over the tank, passed out. "Get him an ambulance," said the supervisor, "and don't ever let that idiot back in this place again." My mum talked to her bosses and sorted me out with a job at the Lucas factory where she could keep an eye on me. "You're going to be a trained car horn tuner," she said. My heart sank. 900 a day. That's how many car horns they wanted tuned. They kept count because every time you did one, you clicked a button. There were 5 of us in the room, so that's 5 car horns burping and beeping and booping all at the same time from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. You came out of that fucking place with your ears ringing so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. But after a couple of hours of listening to that fucking din, I was starting to go insane. So I started to click the button twice for every horn I did, thinking I could knock off early. When I realised I was getting away with it, I started to click 3 times. Then 4, then 5. Then this angry voice comes over the tannoy. "Osbourne, supervisor's office, now." They wanted to know how come I'd done 500 car horns in 20 minutes. That was the end of my first job in the music business. The idea of getting a real job in the music business was a fucking joke. It was just one of those impossible things, like becoming an astronaut or a stuntman or shagging Elizabeth Taylor. Still, ever since the time I'd sung Living Doll at our family knees up, I'd been thinking about starting a band. Then the Beatles happened. All of a sudden, these 4 mop-top scousers were all over the radio and the telly. Using my last paycheck from the job at the Lucas plant, I bought their second LP, With the Beatles. A light went on in my head when I heard that record. Lennon and McCartney's harmonies were like magic. They took me away from Aston and into this fantasy Beatle world. I was 8 years younger than Lennon and 6 years younger than McCartney, so I still had plenty of time to get my first big break, I reckoned. Trouble was, I had no idea how to get a big break. So instead, I decided to grow my hair long and get some tattoos. At least I'd look the part. My hair was easy. The tattoos stung like a fucking bastard. When I was 17, I spent a whole afternoon in Sutton Park, a posh area of Birmingham, spelling out O-Z-Z-Y across my knuckles. I went home that night feeling really fucking pleased with myself. In 1964, something totally unexpected happened. I got a job I enjoyed. It turned out that I was a natural at killing animals. The slaughterhouse that hired me was in Digbeth, one of the older parts of Birmingham. My first job was puke remover, and then they promoted me to cow killer. What a fucking job that was. I had to shoot one bull 5 or 6 times before it went down. Fuck me, he was pissed off. At one point, I thought I'd be the one who'd end up in a bun covered in ketchup. I lasted about 18 months at the slaughterhouse. My final job was fat collector. They had this big tank of boiling hot water, and the trick was to clean the fat and hang it over the poles. So, I'm leaning over the tank, and this guy sneaks up behind me and cuts my apron strings. I just turn around and whack him over the head with one of the fat poles. I just lost my cool, man. "Fuck off and don't come back," said the boss. That's why I became John the burglar. I just couldn't face another factory job. But I soon learned my lesson when they sent me to Winson Green. Every morning during wash time, I'd have my hand over my balls and my back pressed to the wall. I was so fucking scared. If I dropped the soap, it stayed on the fucking floor. But I was worried about more than a rogering. People got killed in that place if they pissed off the wrong guy. So I did exactly what I'd done at Birchfield Road with the bullies. I found the biggest, baddest fuckers in the exercise yard, and I made them laugh by doing crazy things. I'm not proud of the fact that I did time, but it was a part of my life, you know. Knock, knock. I poked my head through the curtains and saw a big-nosed bloke with long hair and a moustache standing outside on the doorstep. He looked like a cross between Guy Fawkes and Jesus of Nazareth. Fuck me, he was wearing velvet trousers. "Are you Ozzy Zig?" said Guy Fawkes in a thick Brummy accent. "I saw your ad." It was a fucking awesome ad in the window of Ringway Music. "Ozzy Zig needs gig," it said in felt-tip capital letters. Underneath I'd written, "Experienced frontman, owns own PA system," and then I put the address. Don't ask me where the Zig in Ozzy Zig came from. "So, you got a gig for me then?" "The lads call me Geezer. You heard of Rare Breed?" "You're the ones with the strobe light and the hippie bloke with the bongos or whatever, right?" "That's us. Only we just lost our singer." "Oh, yeah?" "The ad said you got your own PA system," said Geezer. "That's right." "You sang in any bands before?" "Course I fucking have." "Well, the job's yours then." When my old man found out I was trying to join a band, he offered to help me buy a PA system. To this day, I've no idea why. He could hardly afford to put food on the table, never mind take out a 250 quid loan on an amplifier and 2 speakers. But he took me down to George Clay's music shop by the Rum Runner nightclub in Birmingham, and we picked out this 50-watt Vox system. I hope my father knew how grateful I was for him doing that. All the cool-looking kids would hang around outside Ringway Music, smoking fags, eating chips, arguing about the records they were listening to at the time. All I needed was to get in with that crowd, I thought, and I'd be fucking set. So I wrote the ad, and sure enough, a few weeks later, Geezer came knocking. Geezer played rhythm guitar in Rare Breed, and he wasn't bad at all. But more important than that, he looked the part. He could afford all the very latest stitches too, as he had a real job as a trainee accountant at one of the factories. He'd turn up to rehearsals in lime green bell-bottoms and silver platform boots. I wasn't exactly a conservative dresser myself, mind you. I'd walk around in an old pyjama top for a shirt, with a hot water tap on a piece of string for a necklace. I'll tell you, it wasn't easy trying to look like a rock star with no fucking dough. People would ask me where I got my fashion inspiration from, and I'd tell them, by being a dirty broke bastard and never taking a bath. Most people reckon I'd walk straight out of the funny farm, but they'd look at Geezer and think, I bet he's in a band. The most impressive thing he could do was write lyrics. Really fucking intense lyrics about wars and superheroes and black magic and a load of other mind-blowing stuff. We became pretty tight, me and Geezer. I'll always remember when we were walking around the bullring in the spring or early summer of 1968, and all of a sudden, this bloke with long frizzy blonde hair and the tightest trousers you've ever seen pops out of nowhere and slaps Geezer on the back. Geezer fucking Butler. Geezer turns round and said, "Rob, how are you, man?" "Oh, you know, could be worse." "Rob, this is Ozzy Zig," said Geezer. "Ozzy, this is Robert Plant. He used to sing with the Band of Joy." "Oh, yeah," I said, recognising the face. "I went to one of your shows. Fucking awesome voice, man." "Thanks," said Plant, flashing me this big, charming smile. "So, what you been up to?" asked Geezer. "Well, since you mention it, I've been offered a job." "Nice. What's the gig?" "The Yardbirds." "Whoa, congratulations, man." Bumping into someone like Robert Plant wasn't unusual when you were with Geezer. He was part of the cool crowd, so he went to the right parties, took the right drugs, hung out with the right movers and shakers. I loved being part of it. Still, there was a big problem hanging over us. Our band, Rare Breed, was shit. The only gig I can remember playing in those early days was the Birmingham Fire Station's Christmas party. We made enough dough for half a shandy, split 6 ways. But that gig made an impression on me, because it was the first time I ever experienced stage fright. And fucking hell, man, did I get a bad case of the brown trousers. I was absolutely fucking petrified when I got up on that stage. In the end, I croaked my way through a couple of numbers until we blew out one of the speakers of the PA. Then we fucked off home. I didn't tell my old man about the speaker. I just swapped it with the one in his radiogram. A couple of days later, I decided to pack in singing for good. I remember saying to Geezer down the pub, "Oh, I've had enough, man. This ain't going nowhere." We finished our drinks, shook hands, and went our separate ways. Knock, knock. By then, I'd told the owner of Ringway Music to take down my Ozzy Zig Needs Gig sign, but the bloke on my doorstep was Tony Iommi, the good-looking kid from the year above me at Birchfield Road, who'd brought his electric guitar to school one Christmas. If you wanted to be in a band with anyone, it was Tony. Unfortunately, he didn't seem to feel the same way about me. "Come on, Bill, his name ain't Ozzy Zig. He's Ozzy Osbourne and he's an idiot. I'm not being in a band with that fucking moron." "Fucking hell, Tony," I said. "What's happened to your fingers, man?" Tony was doing this welding job during the day and playing in a band called the Rockin' Chevrolets on the club circuit at night, waiting for his big break. Eventually, an agent spotted him and offered him a professional gig over in Germany, so Tony decided to quit his job in the factory. He thought he'd made it. On Tony's last day in the workshop, the bloke who was supposed to press and cut the metal before it was welded didn't show up, so Tony had to do it. This fucking massive metal press ended up ripping off the tips of the middle and ring fingers on his right hand. Tony's left-handed, so they were his fretboard fingers. Tony suffered from terrible depression for a long time after the accident. Then one day, his old shop foreman brought him a record by Django Reinhardt, the Belgian gypsy jazz guitarist, who played all his solos using just 2 fingers on his fretting hand because he'd burned the others in a fire. Tony made a couple of thimbles for his injured fingers out of a melted-down fairy liquid bottle, sanded them down until they were roughly the same size as his old fingertips, and then glued these little leather pads on the ends to improve his grip on the strings. Then he just learned to play the guitar again, from scratch, even though he had no feeling in 2 fingers. When he learned to play again, he developed a unique style that no one has ever been able to copy. After the accident, Tony played with a band called Mythology up in Carlisle. I never went to a Mythology gig, but I'm told they brought the house down wherever they went. They had this dirty, swampy, heavy blues sound, and they'd cover songs by bands like Buffalo Springfield, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, whose new guitarist at the time was Eric Clapton, who'd just quit the Yardbirds, giving Jimmy Page his big break. The band quickly built a massive following in Cumberland, but then they ran into trouble with the law. All 4 members of the band were done for possession of marijuana. No one would book a band that had been done for drugs, so they came back to Aston, where they could live at their folks' places while they tried to save their careers. After Tony had warmed up a bit, we spent the rest of the night sitting in the back of the van, smoking fags, telling each other what blues records we'd been listening to lately. Then we started to plot our next move. "Before we do anything else, we're going to need a name and a bass player," said Tony. "I don't know any bass players," I said, "but I know a bloke called Geezer who plays rhythm guitar." Tony and Bill looked at me. "Geezer Butler," they said in unison. "Yeah, he'll need some time to learn to play the bass, but how hard can it be, eh? There's only 4 fucking strings." "And what about a name?" said Tony. "The Poker Talk Blues Band," I said. "That's our name." That weekend, we met up for our first rehearsal at a community centre in 6 Ways. Basically, the lads would just jam, and then Tony would give me a nod when he thought I should sing. For lyrics, I just came out with whatever bollocks was in my head at the time. Our first gig was up in Carlisle, thanks to Tony's old mythology contacts. That meant driving 200 miles up the M6 in Tony's rusty old shitbox of a van. The gig itself was amazing, apart from almost crapping my pants with stage fright. When we got back to Aston, Tony said he wasn't happy with the band name. Bill suggested Earth. "It's better than Poker fucking Talk," said Tony. "I agree," said Geezer. That was that. Officially, we didn't have a band leader. Unofficially, we all knew it was Tony. We all knew that Tony belonged right up there with the likes of Clapton and Hendrix. He was our ticket to the big time. Maybe that's why I felt so intimidated by him, even after we became friends. I didn't feel intimidated by Geezer, even though he'd been to a proper school and actually knew stuff. As for Bill, he was the fall guy. Me, I was still the clown, the loudmouth who'd do anything for a dare. We had such a laugh. And that was the thing with us. We always had a sense of humour. It's what made us work together so well. At first, anyway. If it hadn't been for Tony's parents, I'm not sure we'd have made it through the rest of 1968 without starving to death. We were so broke we'd steal raw vegetables from allotments in the middle of the night. Tony's mum and dad would give us sandwiches from the shop, tins of beans, the odd pack of Players No. 6, even petrol money from the till. We never turned down gigs, ever. We were incredibly single-minded. The craziest thing we did, and this was Tony's idea, was to find out whenever a big-name band was coming into town, load up the van with all our stuff, and then just wait outside the venue on the off chance they might not show up. And you know what? It worked. Once. The big-name band was Jethro Tull. They didn't show up. Tony went in to see the venue manager. "Has the band not showed up yet?" he asked, 10 minutes after they were supposed to go on. "Don't fucking start, sunshine," came the pissed-off reply. "Come back tomorrow and we'll give you a refund." "I'm not looking for a refund," said Tony. "I just wanted to let you know we can fill in." "Fill in?" "Yeah." "For Jethro Tull?" "Yeah." "What's the name of your band, son?" "Earth." "Earth?" "Earth, as in the planet." "Oh, right." "Well, you're on in 15 minutes. I'll pay you 10 quid. And watch out for those bottles. The mob's upset." Once the deal was done, Tony ran out of the venue with this huge grin on his face, giving us the double thumbs up. The jolt of adrenaline was indescribable, and the gig was a fucking triumph. The crowd grumbled for the first few minutes, but we ended up blowing them away. One of the best things about it was that Ian Anderson, Tull's lead singer, finally turned up when we were halfway through the set. So there I was, screaming into the mic, and when I looked up I saw Anderson standing at the back of the hall, looking like he was really into the music. It was fucking fabulous. We came off stage buzzing. The venue manager couldn't have been happier. And after all that, all the bookers knew our name. Over the next few weeks, everything started to take off for us. The gigs got bigger, our playing got tighter, and some local managers began sniffing around. One guy in particular took an interest in us. Jim Simpson. He'd been a trumpet player and given up being a musician to set up a management company called Big Bear. He'd also opened a club called Henry's Blues House. It was one of our favourite hangouts. Then, near the end of 1968, Jim invited us to play at the club with 10 Years After, who were a huge blues act at the time. After a few beers, Jim told me and Bill that he was thinking about managing us. It was a huge moment. The next day, me and Bill couldn't wait to tell Tony. We'd booked the rehearsal room at 6 Ways, and the second Tony walked in, I said, "You'll never fucking guess what." But when I told him about the possible deal, he said, "Oh," then looked at the floor. Ian Anderson got in touch with me. Tall's guitarist just quit. He asked me to replace him, and I said yes. "Sorry, lads, I can't turn it down. We're going to be playing with the Rolling Stones in Wembley on the 10th of December. Stunned silence. It was all over. We'd been so close, and now we were a million light years away. "Tony," I said, eventually swallowing hard. "That's fucking great, man. It's what you've always wanted." "Congratulations, Tony," said Geezer. "Yeah," said Bill. "If anyone deserves it, you do." "Thanks, lad," said Tony, sounding like he was trying not to choke up. "You're going to do great, with or without me. You'll see." We weren't bullshitting Tony when we said all that stuff. We'd been through a lot together over the last few months, and all three of us were genuinely pleased for him. Even though it was the worst fucking news we'd ever heard in our lives. There was only one Tony Iommi, and we knew it. It had just worked with Tony. We understood each other. It was obvious to anyone who saw us play. Before he left, Tony had been coming up with all these heavy-duty riffs of his own, heavier than anything I'd heard anywhere before, and Geezer had started to write far-out lyrics to go with them. As for me and Bill, we'd been improving with every gig. And unlike a lot of the one-hit wonder top 40 bands at the time, we weren't fake. We hadn't been put together by some suit and tie in a smoky office in London somewhere. We were the real fucking deal. The one thing we had to look forward to was seeing Tony on the telly. The BBC was going to broadcast a gig in London with the Rolling Stones. It was going to be called the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. Nothing like it had ever been done before. The Stones would basically play a private show with a few of their rock star pals at Intertel Studios in Wembley. In the end, though, the BBC never broadcast the thing. The Stones killed it. It was 28 years before the footage was finally shown at the New York Film Festival. "What do you mean you quit?" asked Geezer at an emergency meeting down the pub a few days before Christmas. "It wasn't my scene," said Tony with a shrug. "The drinks were on him." "You played a gig with John Lennon, man." "I want to be in my own band. I don't want to be someone else's employee." "So Ian Anderson's a tosser then?" I asked, getting to the point. "No, he's all right," said Tony. We didn't have a laugh, you know. "So, are we back together?" said Geezer, trying not to lose his cool by grinning too much. None of us could believe our fucking luck, to be honest with you. One of the first things Jim Simpson did as our manager was pack us off on a European tour. Between gigs, we started to jam out some ideas for songs. It was Tony who first suggested we do something that sounded evil. There was a cinema called the Orient outside the community centre where we rehearsed in 6 Ways, and whenever it showed a horror film, the queue would go all the way down the street and around the corner. "Isn't it strange how people will pay money to frighten themselves?" I remember Tony saying one day. "Maybe we should stop doing blues and write scary music instead." Me and Bill thought it was a great idea, so off we went and wrote some lyrics that ended up becoming the song Black Sabbath. It's basically about a bloke who sees a figure in black coming to take him off to the lake of fire. Then Tony came up with this scary-sounding riff. I moaned out a tune over the top of it, and the end result was fucking awesome. The best thing we'd ever done, by a mile. As for the title of the song, it was Geezer who came up with that. He got it from a Boris Karloff film that had been out for a while. Today, you hear people saying that we invented heavy metal with the song Black Sabbath. As far as we were concerned, we were just a blues band that had decided to write some scary music. I don't remember where we first played Black Sabbath, but I can sure as hell remember the audience's reaction. All the girls ran out of the venue screaming. "Isn't the whole point of being in a band to get a shag? Not to make chicks run away," I complained to the others afterwards. "They'll get used to it," Geezer told me. We'd done shows before at the Star Club, which was on the Reeperbahn in Hamburg, where all the dodgy hookers stand around in their skimpy dresses and fishnets, so we knew roughly what to expect. This time, though, we had a residency. which meant they would pay us a wage and put us up in this bombed-out shithole of a room above the stage. And in return, we'd have to play as many as 7 sets a day, in between gigs from visiting bands. Oh, that's a lot of fun. But it was fucking gruelling, man. Every day we'd start at noon and end at 2 in the morning. You'd do speed, pills, dope, beer, anything you could lay your hands on, just to stay awake. Even so, it was the best training you could ever ask for playing at the Star Club. It's not that I needed any training to be the person I am on stage. I'm a lunatic by nature, and lunatics don't need training. They just are. But the Star Club helped us nail all the new songs we'd written, like The Wizard, N.I.B., named after Bill's beard, which we thought looked like the nib of a pen, War Pigs, Rat Salad, and Fairies Wear Boots. To this day, I have no idea what that song's about, even though people tell me that I wrote the lyrics. The Star Club also helped me get over my stage fright. Once I'd loosened up a bit, I'd just do crazier and crazier things, and the lads encouraged me. One time, I found this can of purple paint backstage, and I dipped my nose in it, which would have been fine if the paint hadn't been fucking indelible. I couldn't get that shit off me for weeks. When we got back to England, we had a meeting at Jim Simpson's house to tell him about our change of name to Black Sabbath. He didn't seem too keen, although to be honest with you, I think he was distracted by my purple nose. By the end of 1969, we were desperate for anything that could take us to the next level. In January 1970, it finally happened. We got a record deal. For a few months, Jim Simpson had been shopping us around by inviting all these bigwigs from London to come to our gigs. Then one night, a guy from Phillips drove up to Birmingham to see us play at Henry's Blues House and decided to take a bet on us. The name Black Sabbath made a big difference, I think. At the time, there was a best-selling occult author called Dennis Wheatley. Hammer horror films were doing massive business, and the Manson murders were all over the telly, so anything with a dark edge was in big demand. Our first single, Evil Woman, was played by the BBC on Radio 1. Once. At 6 o'clock in the morning. I was so nervous, I got up at 5 and drank about 8 cups of tea. They won't play, I kept telling myself. But then... Oh, it's impossible to describe what it feels like to hear yourself on Radio 1 for the first time. It was magic, squared. I ran around the house screaming, "I'm on the fucking radio!" until my mum stomped downstairs in a nightie and told me to shut up. "Evil woman," I sang to her at full volume. "Don't you play your games with me?" Then I was off, out of the door, singing my head off all the way down Lodge Road. As far as I can remember, there was no official talk about making an album. Jim just told us one day that we'd been booked for a week of gigs in Zurich, and that on our way down there we should stop off at Regent Sound Studios in Soho and record some tracks with a producer called Roger Bain and his engineer Tom Allam. So that's what we did. And then the next day we set off for Zurich in the transit to do a residency at a joint called the Hirschen Club. Jim Simpson wanted to see us at his house as soon as we got back from Switzerland, so that afternoon we all met up in his living room. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the finished record of Black Sabbath. The cover was a spooky-looking 15th century watermill. I later found out it was the Maple Durham watermill on the River Thames in Oxfordshire. With all these dead leaves around it, and a sickly-looking woman with long dark hair, dressed in black robes, standing in the middle of the frame with a scary look on her face. It was amazing. Then, when you opened the gatefold sleeve, there was just black everywhere, and an inverted cross with a creepy poem written inside it. We had no input with the artwork, so the inverted cross, a symbol of Satanism we later found out, had nothing to do with us. We just stood there staring at it and going, "Fucking hell, man, this is fucking unbelievable." Then Jim went over to his record player and put it on. I almost burst into tears, it sounded so great. While we'd been in Switzerland, Roger and Tom had put these sound effects of a thunderstorm and a tolling bell over the opening riff of the title track, so it sounded like something from a film. The overall effect was fabulous. I still get chills whenever I hear it. On Friday the 13th of February 1970, Black Sabbath went on sale. I felt like I'd just been born. But the critics fucking hated it. Of all the bad reviews of Black Sabbath, the worst was probably written by Lester Bangs at Rolling Stone. I remember Geezer reading out words like claptrap, wooden, and dogged. But you know what? Being trashed by Rolling Stone was kind of cool, because they were the establishment. The important thing was someone thought we were good, because Black Sabbath went straight to number 8 in Britain and number 23 in America. My old man wasn't too impressed with our first album either. I'll always remember the day I took it home and said, "Look, Dad, I've got my voice on a record." "Oh, well, don't just stand there, put it on. Let's have a bit of a sing-along, eh?" With the first clap of thunder, my dad flinched. I grinned nervously at him. Then, bong, bong, bong. My dad coughed. Finally, after 6 minutes and 18 seconds of Tony and Geezer thrashing away on their guitars, Bill beating the shit out of his drums, and me howling on about a man in black coming to take me away to the lake of fire, my dad rubbed his eyes, shook his head, and looked at the floor. Silence. I can honestly say that we never took the black magic stuff seriously for 1 second. We just liked how theatrical it was. Even my old man eventually played along with it. He made this awesome metal cross during one of his tea breaks at the factory. When I turned up to rehearsals with it, all the other guys wanted one, so I got Dad to make 3 more. I couldn't believe it when I learnt that people actually practiced the occult. The good thing about all the satanic stuff was that it gave us endless free publicity. During its first day of release, Black Sabbath sold 5,000 copies, and by the end of the year, it was on its way to selling 1 million worldwide. None of us could believe it. Not even Jim Simpson could believe it. The poor bloke ended up getting completely overwhelmed. It didn't take long for all the sharks down in London to realise there was blood in the water, as far as Jim was concerned. The first call we got was from Don Arden. We didn't know much about him apart from his nickname, Mr. Big. Then we heard stories about him dangling people out of his 4th floor Carnaby Street office window, stubbing cigars out on people's foreheads, and demanding all his contracts be paid in cash. So we were shitting ourselves when we went down to London to meet him for the first time. When we got off the train at Euston Station, he had his blue Rolls Royce waiting to pick us up. When the meeting was over, we all stood up and said how great it was to meet him, blah, 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 even though none of us wanted anything more to do with him. Then, as we filed out of his office, he introduced us to the chick he'd spent half the meeting bawling at over the phone. "This is Sharon, my daughter," he growled. "Sharon, take these lads down to the car, will you?" When Don huffed back to his office and closed the door behind him, I cracked a joke and made her smile. It was the most wicked, beautiful smile I'd ever seen in my life. To this day, I feel bad about what happened with Jim Simpson. We were so desperate to go to America and get our big break that we didn't have the patience to wait for him to sort himself out. In the end, it was a wide boy called Patrick Meehan who nabbed us. He was only a couple of years older than us, a slick, smooth-talking, good-looking guy, very cool, very sharp. Patrick threw every trick in the book at us. The chauffeured limo, the champagne dinner, the non-stop compliments, and the phony shock that we weren't all multi-millionaires already. He told us that if we signed with him, we could have anything we wanted. Cars, houses, chicks, whatever. By September 1970, Big Bear Management was history, and we were signed up with the Meehan's Company, Worldwide Artists. It took about 3.5 seconds for Jim to sue us. Jim sued Meehan too, for enticement. It all took years to go through the courts. It was like we'd just won the lottery. Money was falling down from the sky. Every day I'd think of something new to ask for. Hello, yes, is that Patrick Meehan's office? It's Ozzy Osbourne. I'd like one of them Triumph Herald convertibles. Can you send me a green one? Cheers. Click. Then, ta-da! The fucking thing will be sitting outside my house the next morning. Meanwhile, we just kept selling more records. What we didn't know was that behind the scenes, Meehan was bleeding us dry. I was never the Romeo type, me. Even after our first album went gold, I never got any good-looking chicks. Black Sabbath was a blokes' band. We'd get fag ends and beer bottles thrown at us, not frilly underwear. But none of that stopped me trying to get my end away. One of the places where I used to go cruising for a good old bonk was the Rum Runner nightclub on Broad Street in Birmingham. That's where I met Thelma Riley, a dark-haired chick behind the counter in the cloakroom. She was beautiful, and I wanted to talk to her. So I did what I always did when I wanted to talk to a bird. I got fucking lollied. Strangely, the old get as dribblingly drunk as possible strategy worked. I pulled her on the dance floor. After a while, we rented a flat together above a laundrette in Edgbaston. A year or so later, in 1971, we got married in a registry office. I thought it was what you did. Get some dough, find a chick, get married, settle down, go to the pub. A few months before the wedding, Black Sabbath finally made it to America. Before we went, I remember Patrick Meehan's dad calling us into a meeting at his London office and telling us that we were going to be ambassadors for British music, so we should fucking behave ourselves. We just nodded and ignored him. Having said that, I made sure to go easy on the booze until we reached the airport. But by the time I got to my seat, I was as pissed as a fart. Then we found out that traffic were on the same plane. I couldn't get over the fact that I was on the same flight as Steve Winwood. For the first time in my life, I began to feel like a proper rock star. Before we left England, we'd already recorded our follow-up to Black Sabbath. We had it in the can only 5 months after the release of the first record. We went back to Regent Sound in Soho to make the second record, and we moved to Island Studios in Notting Hill to do the final mix. That was when Roger Bain realised we needed a few extra minutes of material. Look, lads, we need some filler. Can you jam something? Tony launched into this guitar riff while Bill played around with some drum patterns. I hummed a melody and Geezer sat in the corner scribbling down some lyrics. 20 minutes later, we had a song called Paranoid. It's always the way with the best songs. They come out of nowhere, when you're not even trying. The thing with Paranoid is that it doesn't fit into any category. It was like a punk song years before punk had been invented. The fact is, Tony Iommi turned out to be one of the greatest heavy rock riff makers of all time. Whenever we went into the studio, we'd challenge him to beat his last riff, and he'd come up with something like Iron Man and blow everyone away. But Paranoid was a different class again. About 2 seconds after the Suits of Vertigo heard that song, the name of the whole album became Paranoid. Paranoid went straight to number 4 in the British singles charts and got us on Top of the Pops, alongside Cliff Richard of all people. In those days, 15 million people tuned into Top of the Pops every week. It was fucking awesome, man. I remember being really impressed by Cliff Richard because he did his song live with a full orchestra. When it was our turn to go on, my whole body was numb with fear. I had to sing live. It was my first time on telly and I was shitting myself like I'd never shit myself before. But I got through it. That song changed everything for us. For a week or two, we even had screaming girls showing up at our gigs and throwing their knickers at us, which was a nice change, although we were obviously a bit worried about pissing off our regular fans. I thought America was fabulous. In New York, I discovered pizza. It blew my mind wide fucking open. And then there were the American chicks. On our first night, we stayed at a place called Lowe's Midtown Motoring, which was on 8th Avenue and 48th Street, a sleazy part of town. I couldn't sleep because I had jet lag, which was another wild new experience. So I'm lying there, wide awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's a knock on the door. I get up to answer it, and there's this scrawny-looking chick standing there in a trench coat, which she unbuttons in front of me, and she's completely starkers underneath. "Can I come in?" she whispers in this throaty, sexy voice. So, of course, I go to town on this chick until the sun comes up. Then she gives me a peck on the cheek and fucks off. Later, when we're all at breakfast trying to work out where you put the maple syrup, I go, "You'll never guess what happened to me last night." "Actually," said Bill with a little cough, "I think I can." Turned out we'd all had a knock on our door that night. It was our tour manager's Welcome to America present. During the 2 months of our American tour, we covered distances that we couldn't have imagined back in England. We played the Fillmore East in Manhattan, we played the Fillmore West in San Francisco, we even went to Florida, where I swam in an outdoor swimming pool for the first time. It was midnight, I was out of my mind on dope and booze, and it was beautiful. Bill hated flying, so we drove between a lot of the gigs. Me and Bill's epic road trips ended up being the highlights of all our American tours. Our first gig in America was at a cafe in New York called Ungano's at 210 West 70th Street. Then after we did a show at the Fillmore East with Rod Stewart and the Faces. Rod kept well out of our way. I don't suppose he was too happy about having Black Sabbath supporting him. We were the unwashed hooligans and he was the blue-eyed boy. But the biggest culture shock was at a gig in Philadelphia. It was mostly black guys in the audience and you could tell they hated our music. We did War Pigs and you could have heard a fucking pin drop. One guy, a big tall fella with a massive afro, peered down at me with this puzzled look on his face. "You guys ain't black," he said. That was our only bad gig, mind you. None of us could believe how well the Black Sabbath album had gone down in America. It was a monster. We were getting such big crowds wherever we played, we even started to get a few groupies. I banged 3 chicks one night in a Holiday Inn. 3! Without even leaving my hotel room. To be honest with you, I was flagging a bit with the last one. I had to use the special reserve tank. But it wasn't just groupies who followed us around America. We also got a lot of loonies. Before we even left for America, someone had sent us a film of a black magic parade in San Francisco, held in our honour. There was a bloke who looked like Ming the Merciless sitting in a convertible Rolls Royce, while all these half-naked chicks danced around him in the street. The bloke's name was Anton LaVey, and he was the high priest of the Church of Satan or some bollocks. We didn't want anything to do with it. A lot of people were still freaked out by Sharon Tate's murder, so we didn't want to come off like members of Charles Manson's family. About a year after the first tour, we were playing a gig in Memphis, and this bloke wearing a black cloak ran on stage. Under normal circumstances, if a fan climbed on stage, I'd put my arm around him and we'd have a good old headbang for a bit. But this bloke looked like one of the satanic loonies, so I told him to fuck off out of it and pushed him away towards Tony. Before I knew it, one of our roadies was running on stage with a metal bar raised above his head and he twatted the guy in the face. "What the fuck are you doing, man?" I shouted. "You can't do that." The roadie turned around and said, "Yes, I fucking can. Look." The satanic bloke was lying on the stage with his cloak wide open. In his right hand was a dagger. If it hadn't been for our roadie, Tony might have been a goner. We were on the road non-stop for 2 years after our first American tour. Between 1970 and 1972, we must have crossed the Atlantic 6 times. And even though we were exhausted and ill half the time from the jet lag, the booze and the drugs, it was a fucking blast. We did everything, saw everything, met everyone. We even went to an Elvis gig. It was at the Forum in LA. We were so far up in the gods, it seemed to take longer to get to our seats than it did for the king to do his set. He looked like an ant from where we were sitting, and he did only a few numbers before he buggered off again. We were sitting there thinking, is that it? Then this voice came booming over the tannoy. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building." "Lazy fat bastard," I said, before remembering where I was. You couldn't really get cocaine in Birmingham back then, so I didn't try it until a gig in Denver with a band called Mountain in early 1971. I was in love immediately. It's the same with just about every drug I've ever taken. The first time I try it, that's how I want to feel for the rest of my life. Every day I'd be smoking dope, boozing, having a few toots of coke, fucking around with speed or barbiturates or cough syrup, doing acid, you name it. I didn't know what day it was most of the time. But at some point we made it back to Island Studios in Notting Hill to record our third album, Master of Reality, again with Roger Bain. I can't remember much about it, apart from the fact that Tony detuned his guitar to make it easier to play, Geezer wrote Sweetleaf all about the dope we'd been smoking, and Children of the Grave was the most kick-ass song we'd ever recorded. As usual, the critics hated it, although one of them described us as Titanic's house band on the eve of Armageddon, which sounded about right to me. And the music press obviously didn't put anyone off buying it, because Master of Reality was another monster hit, reaching number 5 in Britain and number 8 in America. I would get this crazy, restless feeling whenever I was at home, like I was going out of my mind. The only way I could handle it was to get loaded. Life at home was made more complicated because Thelma's son, Elliot, was living with us. He was a good kid, but for some reason we never got on. Probably didn't help that my boozing was so over the top, which made me volatile. And if I loved Thelma, I certainly didn't treat her like I did. If I've got any regrets about my life, that's one of them. Thelma suggested that we should go house hunting. I was all for it. Let's live in the country, I said, imagining myself in a tweed suit with green wellies, a Range Rover and a shotgun. Eventually we found one we both liked, Bulrush Cottage in Ranton, Staffordshire. We were in a tea shop in Evesham, Worcestershire, when we decided we'd make an offer on Bulrush. Thelma suddenly went, "Oh my God, my waters have broken." "Eh? I'm having the baby." A few hours later, at 11:20 p.m, little Jessica Osbourne was born. So I became a father for the first time. The date was the 20th of January 1972. Through the hospital window, you could see all these gleaming constellations in every direction. "What should we give her as a middle name?" said Thelma, holding Jessica up to her chest. "Starshine," I said. By the summer of 1972, 6 months after Jess was born, we were back in America, this time to record a new album, which we decided to call Snowblind, in honour of our newfound love of cocaine. We were staying at 773 Stradella Road in Bel Air, a rented 1930s mansion complete with its own staff of maids and gardeners. We never left the house. Booze, drugs, food, groupies, everything was delivered. On a good day, there'd be bowls of white powder and crates of booze in every room, and all these random rock and rollers and chicks in bikinis hanging around the place, all of them as high as we were. It would be almost impossible to exaggerate how much coke we did in that house. In spite of all the arsing around, musically those few weeks in Bel Air were the strongest we'd ever been. For me, Snowblind was one of Black Sabbath's best ever albums, although the record company wouldn't let us keep the title. We didn't argue. Our fourth album became known as just Volume 4. We still managed to get a cheeky reference to cocaine in the liner notes, though. If you look closely enough, you'll see a dedication to the great Coca-Cola Company of Los Angeles. And it was true. That album owed a lot to cocaine. When I listen to songs like Supernaut, I can just about taste the stuff. Frank Zappa once told me that Supernaut was one of his favourite rock and roll tracks of all time, because you can hear the adrenaline. We were flying, you know. And we still really cared about the music. We wanted to impress ourselves before we impressed anyone else. That's how we ended up doing songs like Changes, which didn't sound like anything we'd ever done before. Tony just sat down at the piano and came up with this beautiful riff. I hummed a melody over the top, and Geezer wrote these heartbreaking lyrics about the breakup Bill was going through with his wife at the time. I thought that song was brilliant from the moment we first recorded it. I got to the point where practically every word out of my mouth was coked up bollocks. For 15 hours straight, I'd tell the lads how much I loved them more than anything else in the world. The come-downs were so bad that I used to pray. I'd say, "God, please let me sleep, and I promise I'll never do cocaine again as long as I live." Then I'd wake up with my jaw aching from spouting so much bullshit the previous night, and I'd do another line. When I finally realised the pot wasn't enough to calm me down from all the coke, I started getting into Valium. Then eventually I moved on to heroin. But thank God, I didn't like that stuff. During the making of Volume 4, we all had moments when we were so fucked up that we just couldn't function. Bill came down with hepatitis and almost died. Meanwhile, Geezer ended up in hospital with kidney problems. Just after we'd finished the album, we did a gig at the Hollywood Bowl. Near the end of the gig, Tony walked off stage and collapsed. Severe exhaustion, the doctor said. That's one way of putting it. At the same time, the coke was fucking up my voice good and proper. When you're taking heavy-duty amounts of cocaine, this white gunk starts to trickle down the back of your throat, and you find yourself doing that phlegm-clearing thing all the time. And that puts a lot of stress on that little titty thing that hangs down at the back of your throat, the epiglottis, or the clack, as I've always called it. Eventually, I tore my clack in half. I was lying in bed and I just felt it flop down inside the back of my throat. Then the fucking thing swelled up to the size of a golf ball. So I went to see a doctor on Sunset Boulevard. "I've sucked my clack," I croaked. I pointed at my throat. "Let's have a look," he said, getting out his lollipop stick and his little torch. "Open wide. See R for me now." So I opened my mouth and closed my eyes. "How in God's name did you do that?" "Can you fix it?" "I think so," he said, writing out a prescription. "But whatever it is you've been doing, stop doing it." It was September when we got back to England. By that time, the deal to buy Bulrush Cottage had gone through, and Thelma, Elliot and the baby were already settled in. I also sorted out a bigger house for my mum and dad. Tony and Geezer bought houses when they got back. In less than 3 years, we'd gone from piss-poor backstreet kids to millionaire country gents. It was unbelievable. And I loved living in the country. For starters, I suddenly had enough room to get even more toys sent over from Patrick Meehan's office, like a 7-foot-tall stuffed grizzly bear. I have to say, I really pigged out on the calls to Patrick Meehan's office after we moved into Bulrush Cottage. Everything I'd ever wanted as a kid, I had them deliver. The guns were most fun. The most powerful one I had was this Benelli 5-shot semi-automatic. I tried it out on the stuffed bear one time. Its head just exploded. You should have fucking seen it, man. Obviously, the most important thing I needed to sort out after moving to the country was a ready supply of drugs. So I called up one of my American dealers and got him to start sending me cocaine via airmail. It worked a treat. Then I found a local dope dealer who said he could get some really strong hash from Afghanistan. He wasn't wrong either. A few days later, I killed the vicar. Or at least, I thought I did. It was an accident. You see, in those days out in the countryside, vicars would make house calls. So one day, while I was down the pub, the vicar came round to Bulrush Cottage for one of his visits, and Thelma invited him in for a cup of tea. She rummaged around in the kitchen until she found this nasty-looking cake in an old tin. What Thelma had forgotten was that the week before, my local dope dealer had given me some dodgy hash. I'd grated it into a bowl with some cake mix and baked it. The trouble was, the lump of dope was enormous, so the cake ended up being about 80% dope and 20% mix. I'd almost barf when I tasted it. He'd just swallowed his last mouthful when I got back from the pub. "That really was a delicious slice of cake. Thank you very much, Mrs. Osbourne," the vicar was saying. Then he started to dab his brow with his handkerchief. "Oh my," he said. "I think I'm feeling a little..." Boom! "Fuck! Vicar down!" I shouted, rushing over to see if he was still breathing. "He's just eaten enough Afghan ash to knock out a bleeding elephant." So we carried the vicar to his car, put him on the back seat, found his address in the glove compartment, and I drove him home. He was out cold. When I got to his house, I dragged him out of his car and propped him up on the steps to the front door. I was out of my fucking mind with guilt. So was Thelma. Then one day I walked into the pub and there he was at the bar, in his frock, sipping a cranberry juice. I almost hugged the bloke. "Ah, Mr. Osbourne," he said, shaking my hand. "You know the funniest thing? I can't remember how I got home from your house the other day, and the next morning I had this terrible, terrible flu." "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, Vicar. I was having hallucinations for 3 days, you know. I convinced myself that Martians had landed on the vicarage lawn and were trying to organise a tombola." "That's terrible, Vicar. If there's anything I can do for the church, just let me know, OK?" "Do you play the organ by any chance?" No. But you are in some kind of pop group, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." "Tell me, what do you call yourselves?" "Black Sabbath." "Oh, that's a rather peculiar name, isn't it?" We recorded the next Black Sabbath album in Clearwell Castle, a haunted house in the middle of absolutely fucking nowhere in the Forest of Dean on the Welsh border. It scared the crap out of us from day one. We hadn't been there a day before the practical joke started. I realised that if you put a cartridge in our 8-track machine and turned down the volume all the way, when it reached the end of a song, it would make this loud ch-chunk-chick noise, which would echo off the stone walls. So I hid the machine under Tony's bed, Just before he turned in for the night, after we'd spent the evening putting the willies up each other with a séance in the dungeon, I sneaked into his room, pressed play and set the volume to 0. Then I ran out and hid in the room next door. Eventually I heard Tony get into bed. I waited. It was pitch black. Apart from the occasional creak from the rafters and the wind rattling the windows, there was just this eerie silence. I waited and waited, and then, out of the darkness, ch-chunk, chick! All I heard from Tony's room was, "Ah!" and then a thump as he fell out of bed. Then the door burst open and Tony came charging out in his underpants screaming, "There's something in my fucking room!" I didn't stop laughing for days. The problem was that Volume 4 had been a classic, by Black Sabbath standards anyway, which meant we wanted the follow-up to be another classic. But you can't control that. For the first time ever, Tony seemed to be having a hard time coming up with new material, which meant no riffs, and without riffs we had no songs. But a couple of days later, Tony came down the dungeon and started playing the riff to Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Like I said, every time we thought Tony couldn't do it again, he did it again. And better. But we still couldn't concentrate in that bloody castle. The funny thing is, the only genuinely dangerous thing that happened during our time at Clearwell Castle was when I got loaded and fell asleep with my boot in the fire. All I can remember is waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a funny feeling at the end of my leg, then jumping up, screaming and hopping around the room with this flaming boot, looking for something wet to put it in. Everyone else thought it was hilarious. Geezer just looked at me and said, "Gives a light, Ozzy." But the smile was soon wiped off his face when an ember flew off my boot and set the carpet on fire. By the time we left Clearwell Castle, we at least had most of the new album written, so we moved on to Morgan Studios just off Willesden High Road in North London to finish it off. Morgan Studios was a very popular place at the time, so you'd run into other bands and usually you'd end up going over to the little cafe they had in there. It had a dartboard and served booze, and having a bit of a laugh. This time, though, while we were working on our album in Studio 4, Yes were making Tales from Topographic Oceans in Studio 3. They were hippies, so they'd bought in all of these cut-out cows to make their recording space look earthy. I later found out that the cows even had electrically powered udders. No fucking kidding. During the whole time we were at Morgan Studios, the only member of Yes I ever saw in the cafe was Rick Wakeman, their superstar keyboard player. One of the funniest stories I ever heard about him was from the time when Yes went on tour with that album. He got so fed up that halfway through one of the 8-hour twiddly bits, he got his roadie to order a curry and bring it to him on stage. Then he sat there at his keyboards eating a chicken vindaloo under his cape while smoking a fag. He didn't last much longer in Yes after that. Anyway, one day at Morgan Studios, I asked Rick if he'd like to come over to Studio 4 and hear some of our new tracks. I remember playing the melody of Sabra Cadabra to him on my ARP 2600 synthesizer. There I was murdering this riff with one grubby finger, when Rick just went, maybe it would sound better like this, and leaned over the keyboard. His fingers moved so fast I swear you couldn't see the fucking things. I asked him right then if he'd play on the album, and he said he'd love to, as long as we paid him his usual fee. How much, I asked. 2 pints of Director's Best Bitter. By now our album had a title, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and it was another stonker. Our last truly great album, I think. Even the artwork was spot on. It showed a bloke lying on his bed being attacked by demons in his sleep, with a skull and the number 666 above his head. I fucking love that cover. And with the music we'd managed to strike just the right balance between our old heaviness and our new experimental side. On the one hand, you had tracks like Spiral Architect, which featured a full orchestra, and Fluff, which sounded almost like the Shadows. It was named in honour of Alan Fluff Freeman, the DJ who always played our records on Radio 1. On the other, there was A National Acrobat, which was so heavy it was like being hit over the head with a lump of concrete. I even got one of my own songs on the album, Who Are You? We were all happy with Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, I think. Even Patrick Meehan and the record company were happy, which meant only one thing, of course. Things could only go downhill from there. I should have known that bad things were about to happen to Black Sabbath when we flew to America in 1974 and the bloke sitting next to me croaked it halfway across the Atlantic. One minute I was hearing this choking noise, the next I was sitting next to a corpse. What I remember most about the tour to promote Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is everyone started to get pissed off. By now, Patrick Meehan had started to become the annoying flash bastard who never gave you a straight answer when you asked him how much dough you were making. Meanwhile, Tony was grumbling about doing all the work in the studio, which meant he had no personal life. But then again, Tony loved being in the studio. He'd even started to produce the albums himself. Geezer was also getting fed up because he was tired of me asking him for lyrics all the time. One reason we weren't getting on so well is that we'd all started to develop these coked-up rock star egos. It was happening to a lot of bands in those days. When we did the Cal Jam Festival at the Ontario Motor Speedway in 1974, for example, people were starting to think they were gods. You should have seen the rig Emerson, Lake and Palmer had. Halfway through their set, Keith Emerson did a solo on a grand piano while it was lifted off the stage and spun around end over end. Another crazy thing that happened around this time was getting to know Frank Zappa in Chicago. We were doing a gig there, and it turned out that he was staying at our hotel. At the time, he'd just released this quadraphonic album called Apostrophe, which had a track on it called Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. Fucking classic. We ended up hanging out with his band in the bar. Then the next day we got word that Frank wanted us to come to his Independence Day party, which was going to be held that night at a restaurant around the corner. So come 8 o'clock, off we went to meet Frank. When we arrived at the restaurant, there he was, sitting at this massive table surrounded by his band. Later, after we'd finished eating, I was sitting next to Frank when two waiters burst out of the kitchen, wheeling a massive cake in front of them. You should have seen that cake, man. It was made into the shape of a naked chick with two big icing-covered tits, and her legs were spread wide apart. But the craziest thing about it was that they'd rigged up a little pump, so champagne was squirting out of her vagina. You could have heard a pin drop in that place until the band finally started to sing America the Beautiful. Then everyone had to have a ceremonial drink of the champagne, starting with Frank. When it was my turn, I took a long gulp, screwed up my face and said, "Ugh. Tastes like piss." Everyone thought that was hilarious. By the mid-70s, everything had changed with Black Sabbath. In the early days, we used to hang out with each other all the time, and whenever we arrived in a new place for a gig, we'd walk around the town like a little gang, trying out the pubs and clubs, hitting on chicks, getting pissed. But as time went on, we saw less and less of each other. When me and Bill did our road trips, for example, we hardly spent any time with Tony or Geezer. Then even me and Bill started to drift apart. I was the noisy fucker who would always be throwing parties and having chicks in my room and getting up to all sorts of debauchery, and Bill would just want to stay in his bed and sleep. Then, all of a sudden, everything just blew up. For a start, the publishing rights to a lot of our early work had already been sold to a company called Essex Music, in perpetuity, which was a posh way of saying forever. At some point, we realised that we'd been stitched up. So we fired Meehan. Then all this legal crap started, with lawsuits flying around all over the place. While we were working on the follow-up to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which we ended up calling Sabotage in reference to Meehan's bullshit, writs were being delivered to us at the mixing desk. You can hear the frustration on Sabotage. One song I'm very proud of on that album is The Writ. I wrote most of the lyrics myself, which felt a bit like seeing a shrink. All the anger I felt towards Meehan came pouring out. Aside from the writ, I can't say I'm very proud of much else that happened in that period. Like pulling a gun on Bill while I was having a bad acid trip at Bulrush Cottage. The gun wasn't loaded, he was very cool about it at the time, but we've never talked about it since, which means it was probably quite a big deal. I had a few bad acid trips around that time, actually. Another night we were at Fields Farm, Bill's old rented house, which a couple of roadies had taken over, and we were getting badly fucked up for some reason. All I can remember is wandering off into a field and meeting these two horses. Then one of them said to the other, "Fuck me, that bloke can talk." And I freaked out, big time. I hit Thelma too, which is probably the worst thing I ever did in my life. What made it even worse was that we'd just had our second kid, little Louis. If there's one thing I wish for in my life, it's that I could take all that back. While all that fucked up stuff was going on, we decided to make another album. This time hauling all our gear and crew to America and booking into Criteria Studios in Miami. The title we'd decided on was Technical Ecstasy, although I can't say I was 100% enthusiastic. At the same time as our sales were falling, the record company wasn't as interested as it used to be. We'd just got $1 million tax bill from the IRS in America. We couldn't afford to pay our legal bills, and we didn't have a manager. I'm not saying the album was all bad, it wasn't. For example, Bill wrote a song called It's All Right, which I loved. But I kept thinking about what it would be like to have a solo career. I'd even had a t-shirt made with Blizzard of Oz written on the front. Then Thelma bought me some chickens. She probably thought it would help bring me down to earth, but then the novelty wore off, especially when I realised that Thelma expected me to feed the fucking things and clean out their shit. "Thelma," I said to her one morning after I'd finally had enough, "where did you get those chickens from? They're broken." "What do you mean they're broken? They're not laying any eggs." "Well, it would help if you fed them, John. Besides, they're probably stressed out, poor things." "Why'd you say that?" "Come on, John. Firing warning shots over their heads every morning probably isn't helping much." "Everyone needs a bit of encouragement. You're scaring the living daylights out of them." As the weeks and months went by, I kept forgetting to feed the chickens and they kept forgetting to lay any eggs. All I would hear from Thelma was, "John, did you feed the chickens?" It was driving me fucking nuts. I was trying to have a break. Making Technical Ecstasy had been knackering, mainly thanks to all the boozing involved, but I couldn't get any peace. If it wasn't Thelma, it was the lawyers. If it wasn't the lawyers, it was the accountants. If it wasn't the accountants, it was the record company. And if it wasn't the record company, it was Tony or Bill or Geezer worrying about the new direction or complaining about our tax bills. The only way I could handle it was to get loaded all the time. Then one day, I finally lost it. I'd been up all night, a lock-in at the Hand and Cleaver, followed by more boozing at home, then a few toots of coke, then some dope, then some more coke, then a blackout around breakfast time to refresh myself, then some coke to wake me up again. By then it was time for lunch, so I had a bottle of cough syrup, 3 glasses of wine, some more coke, a joint, half a packet of cigarettes and a Scotch egg. But no matter how much I put away, I couldn't get rid of this horrendous, restless feeling. I was going insane. I was just about to leave the house for the Hand and Cleaver when I heard Thelma coming down the stairs. She walked into the kitchen and said, "I'm going to my mum's to get the kids." Then she turned to look at me, standing there beside the fridge in my wide fronts and my dressing gown, fag in mouth, giving my balls a good scratch. "Did you feed the chickens?" she said. "I told you, they're broken." "Just feed them, John, for God's sake. I'm going down the pub, wearing the terry cloth bathrobe you got for Christmas." "Yeah." "Classy, John, very classy." Next thing I knew, I was staggering out of the house in a pair of wellies, heading in the direction of the pub. When I got to the gate at the bottom of the driveway, I suddenly had a change of heart. "You know what?" I said to myself. "I'm going to feed those chickens. Fuck it. If it keeps her happy, I'll do it." But I was thirsty now, so I went over to where the Range Rover was parked, pulled open the door and reached into the glove box for my emergency bottle of scotch. Swig. Ah, that's better. On I went into the garden. But then I had another change of heart. Fuck the chickens, I thought. Not one of those little fuckers has ever laid any eggs for me. Swig. I lit another fag. Then I remembered that I still hadn't finished the fag that was already in my mouth, so I flicked it into Thelma's vegetable patch. I changed direction again, this time heading towards the shed. I threw open the door and stood there, looking up at my Benelli semi-automatic on the gun rack. Then I set about stuffing the pockets of my dressing gown full of cartridges. Next I reached up to the top shelf for the jerry can of petrol. Then I lurched towards the chicken coop. When I reached the coop, I knelt down and took a look inside. The chickens clucked and nodded their little beaks. "Anyone laid any eggs?" I asked, like I didn't already know the answer to that fucking question. "Didn't think so," I said, standing up. "Too bad." Then I picked up the gun. Safety off. Aim. Buck, buck. Bang, bang. Aim. Buck. Bang, bang. Aim. Buck. Bang. The chickens, the ones who hadn't already gone off to meet their maker, were going nuts. By the time I was done, there was blood and feathers and bits of beak all over the fucking place. But I felt fucking fabulous, like someone had just lifted a 3-ton anvil off my back. I put down the shotgun, picked up the jerry can, and started emptying it over what was left of the chickens. I lit up another fag, took a long drag, stood well back, then flicked it into the coop. Whoosh! Flames everywhere. Then I took the leftover cartridges out of my pocket and started throwing them into the fire. Bang! 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 I went. Then something moved behind me. I almost fell over the gun and shot myself in the nuts with fright. I turned around to see a chicken legging it away from me. That little fucker. I heard myself letting out this weird psycho noise. Yeah! And then I set off after it. I clomped back over to the shed, found a sword, and came out with it raised above my head, samurai style. Die, you chicken bastard, die, I shouted as the chicken made a last-ditch run for the fence at the end of the garden, its little beak nodding so fast it looked like its head would fly off at any second. I'd almost caught up with it when the front door of my neighbour's house burst open. Then this little old lady, Mrs. Armstrong I think her name was, came running out with a garden hoe in her hands. She was used to all kinds of crazy shit going on at Bulrush Cottage, but this time I don't even think she could believe it. I looked up and our eyes met. "Ah, good evening, Mr. Osbourne," she said. "I see you're back from America." More cartridges exploded behind me. "Unwinding, are we?" she asked. I'd had enough. None of us was getting on. The final straw was a meeting with Colin Newman, our accountant, when he told us that if we didn't settle our tax bills soon, we'd be going to prison. So one day, I just walked out of a rehearsal and didn't come back. Then I got a call from Norman, my sister Jean's husband. Dad was riddled with cancer, it turned out. He was 64. When I got to the hospital, my dad told me, "There's something about you drinking, John, and stop taking sleeping pills." "I've left Black Sabbath," I told him. "They're finished then," he said. Then he fell asleep. He died at 11:20 on the 20th of January 1978, in the same hospital on the same date, at the same time as Jess had been born 6 years earlier. His funeral was a week later and he was cremated. The only way I could handle my father's funeral was to get out of my skull. The coffin was sealed, but for some stupid fucking piss reason, I decided I wanted to see Dad again one last time. So I got one of the pallbearers to unscrew the lid. A bad idea, that was. I miss my dad a lot, even now. I just wish we could have sat down and have had a good old man-to-man conversation about all the stuff I never knew to ask him when I was a kid. I was too pissed and busy being a rock star to ask him when I was in my 20s. But I suppose that's always the way, isn't it? The day I left Black Sabbath, we were at Rockfield Studios in South Wales trying to record a new album. I just walked out of the studio and fucked off back to Bulrush Cottage in Thelma's Mercedes. And then, like a pissed dickhead, I started to slag off the band in the press. But you know, when a band splits up, it's like a marriage ending. For a while, all you want to do is hurt each other. The bloke they found to replace me after I walked out was another Brummy called Dave Walker, a guy I'd admired for a long time, actually. He'd been with Savoy Brown and then Fleetwood Mac for a while. But for whatever reason, things didn't work out with Dave. So when I came back a few weeks later, everything was back to normal. On the surface, at least. I just turned up in the studio one day. I think Bill had been trying to act as a peacemaker on the phone, and that was the end of it. We picked up where we'd left off with the album, which we decided to call Never Say Die. Never Say Die bombed like none of our albums had ever done before in America, but it did okay in Britain, where it went to number 12 in the album charts and got us a slot on top of the Pops, which was good fun, actually, because we got to meet Bob Marley. I'll always remember the moment he came out of his dressing room and you literally couldn't see his head through the cloud of dope smoke. He was smoking the biggest, fattest joint I've ever seen. I kept thinking, he's going to have to lip sync. No one can do a live show when they're that high. But no, he did it live. Flawlessly, too. We decided to hire Don Arden as our manager, mainly because we'd been impressed by what he'd done for the Electric Light Orchestra. And for me, the best thing about being managed by Don Arden was getting to see his daughter Sharon on a regular basis. Almost immediately, I began falling in love with her from a distance. It was that wicked laugh that got me, and the fact she was so beautiful and glamorous. She wore fur coats and had diamonds dripping from everywhere. By then, Sharon was helping to run the business with Don. But I knew it was all over with Black Sabbath, and it was clear they'd had enough of my insane behaviour. One of my last memories of being with the band was missing a gig at the Municipal Auditorium in Nashville during our last US tour. I'd been doing so much coke with Bill while driving between shows in his GMC mobile home that I hadn't slept for 3 days straight. But at 5 o'clock in the morning on the day of the gig, after we pulled into town, I finally hit the sack at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. It was the best fucking sleep I'd ever had in my life, but unfortunately I was in the wrong room so nobody could find me. When I woke up, I'd been asleep for 24 hours. I called the tour manager's room. "It's me, Ozzy," I said. "I think there might be a problem." First there was silence, then tears of rage. To this day, I've never had a bollocking like it. It was Bill who told me I was fired. The date was the 27th of April 1979, a Friday afternoon. We were doing some rehearsals in LA, and I was loaded. But then I was loaded all the time. The gist was that Tony thought I was a piss-coked-up loser and a waste of time for everyone concerned. I didn't let it affect my friendship with Bill, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel betrayed by what happened with Black Sabbath. We were like a family, like brothers, and firing me for being fucked up was hypocritical bullshit. We were all fucked up. But I don't give a fuck anymore, and it worked out for the best in the end. I don't have anything bad to say about the guy they hired to replace me, Ronnie James Dio, who'd previously been with Rainbow. He's a great singer. Then again, he ain't me, and I ain't him. So I just wish they'd called the band Black Sabbath too. That's all. All of a sudden, I was unemployed. I remember thinking, well, I've still got a few dollars in my pocket, so I'll have one last big fling in LA. Then I'll go back to England and work on a building site or something. The first thing I did was check myself into a place called Le Parc Hotel in West Hollywood, paid for by Don Arden's company, Jet Records. I just wanted to shut everything out, make everything go away. So I hid in Le Parc and drank. Then one day, this drummer called Martin O'Seif knocked on my door. He told me that Sharon from Jet Records was coming over to pick something up from him, but that he had to leave town for a gig. Then he handed me an envelope. As soon as I closed the door, I got a knife and opened it. Inside was $500 in cash. I just called up my dealer and bought $500 worth of coke. A few hours later, Sharon came over and asked if I had something to give her. No, I don't think so, I said, all innocent. There was a massive bag of coke on the table next to a ripped-up envelope with Sharon written on it. Sharon gave me a monumental bollocking when she saw it, shouting and cursing and telling me I was a fucking disaster. I guess I won't be shagging her any time soon then, I thought. But she came back the next day to find me lying in a puddle of my own piss, smoking a joint. Look, she said, if you want to get your shit together, we want to manage you. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't. At first, Don wanted me to start a band called Son of Sabbath, which I thought was a horrendous idea. But then Sharon started to take more control, and we decided that I should make a proper solo album. I wanted to call it Blizzard of Oz, and little by little, things started to come together. I'd never met anyone who could sort things out like Sharon could. As a manager, you always knew exactly where you stood with her. Of course, before I could make an album and go on tour, I needed a band. Sharon helped me out, taking me to see all these young up-and-coming LA guitarists. Then a friend of mine, Dana Strom, said to me, Look, Ozzy, there's one guy you really have to see. Randy Rhoads plays with a band called Quiet Riot, and he's red hot. So one night, this tiny American bloke came over to Le Parc to introduce himself. He had this weirdly deep voice, and he was so thin he was almost not there. I remember him plugging his Gibson Les Paul into a little practice amp, and then he started doing these finger exercises. I had to say to him, Stop, Randy, just stop right there. What's wrong? You're hired. You should have heard him play, man. I almost cried, he was so good. Soon we were flying back to England for rehearsals. The first thing we wrote was Goodbye to Romance. I was just walking around the house one day singing this melody that had been in my head for months, and Randy asked, Is that your song or a Beatles song? I said, Oh no, it's nothing, just this thing I've got stuck in my head. But he made me sit down with him until we'd worked it out. It was the first time I'd ever felt like I was an equal partner when it came to songwriting. Another vivid memory of working with Randy was when we wrote Suicide Solution. We were at a party for a band called Wild Horses at John Henry's, a rehearsal studio in London. Randy was sitting in a corner experimenting with riffs on his Flying V. And all of a sudden he just went, da-da-da-da, da-da-da. I shouted over, Whoa, Randy, what was that? He just shrugged. I told him to play what he'd just played. Then I started to sing this lyric I had in my head for a while. Wine is fine, but whiskey's quicker. Suicide is slow with liquor. And that was it. Most of the song was written right there. The night ended with everyone on stage jamming. Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy was there. Great fucking performer. Great voice, great style. But the old heroin got him in the end. One thing Sharon's brother managed to get done when we were in England was find us a bass player. Bob Daisley, an Aussie bloke, who'd been signed to Jet with a band called Widowmaker. I liked Bob immediately. Getting a drummer wasn't so easy. We seemed to audition half of Britain before we finally came across Lee Kerslake, who'd played with Uriah Heep. Another early member of our lineup was a keyboard player from Ipswich called Lindsay Bridgewater. He was a very educated boy, was Lindsay, and he'd never met the likes of us before. I told him, While you're playing, I want you to growl at the audience." The poor bloke didn't last long. I'd be talking out of my arse if I said I didn't feel like I was in competition with Black Sabbath when we made Blizzard of Oz. Part of me was shitting myself that they were going to be more successful without me, and their first album with Dio was pretty good. It went to number 9 in Britain and number 28 in America. But by the time we got Blizzard in the can at Ridge Farm Studios in Surrey, I knew we had a cracking album of our own. And it was magic to be in control, like I'd finally pulled something off. As soon as the radio stations got hold of Crazy Train, the thing just exploded. When the album came out in Britain in September 1980, it went to number 7 in the album charts. When it came out in America 6 months later, it peaked at number 21, but it eventually sold 4 million copies, making it one of Billboard's top 100 best-selling albums of the decade. A few nights before the tour started, I got Sharon in the sack for the first time. It had taken fucking long enough. I fell for Sharon so badly, man. The thing is, before I met her, I'd never come across a girl who was like me. I mean, when me and Sharon went out, people used to think we were brother and sister. We were so similar. Wherever we went, we were always the drunkest and the loudest. We got up to some crazy shit in those early days. One night in Germany, we went to a big dinner with the head of CBS Europe, who were releasing Blizzard of Oz over there. He was a big bearded cigar-chomping bloke and very straight. I was out of my fucking clock, of course. So we're all sitting there at this huge table, and halfway through the meal I get the idea to climb on the table and start doing a striptease. Everyone thinks it's funny for a while, but I end up stark bollock naked, take a piss in the CBS guy's carafe of wine, kneel down in front of him and kiss him on the lips. They didn't think that was very funny. We didn't get a record played in Germany for years afterwards. Sharon was managing me virtually single-handed when we did the Blizzard of Oz tour. This was my chance, and I knew I was only going to get one. I learned that when Sharon's on a mission, she'll fucking throw herself at it lock, stock and barrel. I trusted Sharon like I'd never trusted anyone before on the business side of things. But Sharon wasn't only good with money, she knew how to manage my image too. She had me out of my grubby old Black Sabbath get-up in a second. I'd wear spandex trousers and these long coats studded with rhinestones. Looking back now, I'm not embarrassed by those clothes, but I am embarrassed by how bloated I was. I was a fat, boozy, pizza-eating fuck. Another person I learned to trust on that tour was Tony Dennis. He was this little Geordie bloke who kept turning up to the gigs every night without fail. He came to so many shows I ended up letting him in for free, even though I couldn't understand a fucking word he said. And he's been with me ever since as Tony. Some nights, Sharon would go out of one door and Thelma would come in the other. I was knackered all the time having 2 women on the go. Looking back now, of course, I should have just left Thelma. But the thought of losing my family was unbearable to me. On the other hand, I'd never known what it was like to fall in love before I met Sharon, even though we didn't exactly have a normal romance. When we weren't shagging, we were fighting, and when we weren't fighting, we were drinking. But we were inseparable, couldn't stay away from each other. So that Christmas, with the British leg of the tour over, I told Thelma everything. Thelma went up like a bottle of pop, kicked me out and told me she needed time to think. Then Don Arden called Thelma to a meeting in London and told her he was putting his son David in charge of me to get me away from Sharon. But the truth was, he was also shitting himself that Sharon was going to leave Jet Records and go it alone, which could end up costing him a fortune, especially if she took me with her, which is exactly what she did in the end. Before we took the Blizzard of Oz tour to America in April 1981, we went back to Ridge Farm and recorded Diary of a Madman. It took us just under 3 weeks, I think. We were all living in this crappy little flat while we were doing the sessions, and I'll always remember the morning when I woke up and heard this amazing acoustic riff coming out of Randy's room. I burst through his door, still in my underpants, and he was sitting there with a very uptight-looking classical instructor having a lesson. "What was that you just played?" I said, while the instructor stared at me like I was the Loch Ness Monster. "Ozzy, I'm busy." "I know, but what was that you just played?" "Mozart." "Right, we're nicking it." "We can't nick Mozart." "I'm sure he won't mind." It ended up being the intro to Diary of a Madman, although by the time Randy had finished messing around with it, there was hardly any Mozart left. The rest of the album was a blur. We were so rushed for time that we ended up mixing it on the road. It was around then that Bob and Lee started to bitch and moan about everything, which drove me fucking nuts. Anyway, at some point I remember Sharon coming up to us very excited and saying, "Great news, guys. The Palladium in New York want us to do 2 shows in one night." I couldn't believe it. Everything was really taking off. But Bob and Lee said, "Well, if we're doing 2 shows, we want double our travel expenses and double our pay." I wanted them gone after that. Luckily, Sharon managed to sign up Tommy Aldridge, the drummer I'd wanted from the start, and a bass player called Rudy Sarzo, who'd worked with Randy in Quiet Riot. When the second album was finally done, we packed up our stuff, got on a plane and went to LA for a week of rehearsals and record company meetings before the tour began in Maryland. Don't ask me who bought the doves. All I know is that Sharon showed them to me when we were in the limo on the way over to the Century City headquarters of CBS Records in LA. "Aren't they beautiful?" she said. "Listen, they're cooing." Aww. Our meeting with CBS was a big deal. Although Blizzard of Oz had been a hit in England, we badly needed success in America because we were broke. Everything depended on it. "What do you want doves for anyway?" I asked Sharon, swigging from the bottle of Cointreau I'd bought with me. "Don't you remember, Ozzy? Our conversation? Last night?" "They're for the meeting. When we get in there, you're going to throw the doves in the air so they fly around the room, and then you're going to say rock and roll and give them the peace sign." I couldn't remember any of it. It was only 11 o'clock in the morning, but I was already on Planet Booze. I'd even forgotten why we were going to see CBS. But then Sharon reminded me, "You're nothing in this country as a solo artist, Ozzy. When you go into this meeting, you've got to make an impression." "With doves," I said. "Exactly." I put down the bottle and took the birds from Sharon. "Why don't I bite their heads off?" I said, holding them up in front of my face. "That'll make an impression." Sharon just laughed. "I'm serious," I said. "Ozzy, you're not going to bite their heads off." "Yeah, I fucking am. I've been feeling a bit peckish all morning." Sharon laughed again. The meeting was bullshit. A bunch of fake smiles and limp handshakes. Then someone told me how excited they were that Adam Ant was coming to America. Adam Ant? I almost chinned the cunt when he said that. It was obvious none of them gave a shit. Even the PR chick kept looking at her watch. But the meeting went on and on until eventually I got pissed off waiting for Sharon to give me the cue to throw the doves in the air. In the end, I just got up, walked across the room, sat down on the arm of the PR chick's chair and pulled one of them out of my pocket. "Oh, cute," she said, giving me another fake smile. That's it, I thought. I opened my mouth wide. Across the room I saw Sharon flinch. Then I went chomp, spit. The dove's head landed on the PR chick's lap in a splatter of blood. To be honest with you, I was so pissed it just tasted of Cointreau. Well, Cointreau and feathers. And a bit of beak. Then I threw the carcass on the table and watched it twitch. For a split second, all you could hear was everyone taking a breath at the same time and the photographer in the corner going click, click, click. Then, pandemonium. The PR chick started screaming, "Ew, ew, ew," while a bloke in a suit ran over to the bin in the corner and puked. Then alarms started going off as someone yelled into the intercom for security, "Get this animal out of here, now!" At that moment, I took the other dove out of my pocket. "Hello, birdie," I said to it, giving it a kiss on the head. "My name's Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm here to promote my new album, Blizzard of Oz." Then I opened my mouth, and everyone in the room went, "No!" People were covering their eyes with their arms and screaming at me to stop it and get the fuck out. But instead of biting its head off, I let it go, and it flapped happily around the room. "Peace," I said, as 2 massive security guards burst into the room, grabbed me by the arms and dragged me out backwards. The panic in that place was insane, man. Meanwhile, Sharon was pissing herself laughing. "You are banned from the CBS building, you freak show," said the chief security bloke after he'd pushed me out of the front door of the building into the 100-degree LA heat. Sharon followed me outside. Then she grabbed me by the collar and kissed me. "That poor fucking creature," she said. "We'll be lucky if CBS don't pull the plug on the whole record after that performance. They might even sue us. You bad, bad, bad boy. So why aren't you giving me a bollocking then? I asked her, confused. Because the press are going to fucking love it. All in all, I have great memories of that first American tour. And it wasn't just because Blizzard of Oz had sold 1 million copies by the time we'd finished. It was because I had such fabulous people around me. I don't know what I ever did to deserve Randy Rhoads. And I was having the greatest nights of my life with Sharon. We'd do stuff together that I'd never done before, like clubbing in New York. We used to go to this bar called PJ's, do coke, meet all these random people, and have crazy adventures. We even hung out with Andy Warhol a few times. He was friends with a chick called Susan Blonde who worked for CBS. He never said a word. He'd just sit there and take pictures of you, with this freaky look on his face. I hung out a lot with Lemmy from Motorhead on that tour too. He's a very close friend of the family now. Motorhead opened a few shows for us on that tour. When I finally got back to Bulrush Cottage at the end of 1981, I made a big effort to sort things out with Thelma. We even booked a holiday to Barbados with the kids. Trouble is, if you're a chronic alcoholic, Barbados isn't the place to go. As soon as we got to the resort, I realised you could drink at the beach 24 hours a day. When we got on the plane to go home, Thelma turned to me and said, "This is the end, John. I want a divorce." I still didn't believe her. When the plane landed at Heathrow, someone from Jet Records had organised a helicopter to pick me up and take me to a meeting about the Diary of a Madman tour. I went to this country hotel where Sharon was waiting with all these set designers and lighting technicians. They led me into a conference room with a scale model of the Diary of a Madman stage in the middle of it. "It's brilliant," I said. "Now all we need is a midget." The idea had come to me in Barbados. Every night on the tour, halfway through Goodbye to Romance, we'd stage the execution of a midget. I'd shout, "Hang the bastard," or something like that, and this little guy would be hoisted up with a fake noose around his neck. It would be magic. So, before we went out on the road, we held midget auditions. After a few days of searching, we finally found just the right bloke for the job. His name was John Allen, and funnily enough, he was an alcoholic. When the tour started at the end of 1981, I was a wreck. I was in love with Sharon, but at the same time I was cut to pieces by losing my family. The fights between me and Sharon started to get even crazier than before. I'd get drunk and try to hit her, and she'd throw things at me. Wine bottles, gold discs, TVs, you name it, would all come flying across the room. I ain't proud to admit that a few of my punches reached their target. I don't know why Sharon stuck around, to be honest with you. Sometimes she'd wake up in the morning and I'd be gone, because I'd hitchhike back to Bulrush Cottage. It took me a long time to get over the breakup with Thelma, but eventually my little trips to Bulrush Cottage ended. The last time I went there, as soon as I walked through the gate, this heavy-set bloke popped out of nowhere and said, "Oi, where do you think you're going, eh?" "This is my house," I told him. The bloke shook his head. "No, it ain't. This is your ex-wife's house, and you're not allowed within 50 yards of it. Court order." "Can I at least get some clothes?" I asked. "Wait here." 5 minutes later, some of my old stage clothes came flying out of the door and landed on the grass. Then the door opened again, and out came my 7-foot-tall stuffed grizzly bear, his head in shreds. I felt terribly sorry for myself that night. I haven't seen Thelma for decades, and to be honest with you, I think it's for the best. By the time we took the Diary of a Madman tour to America, we were experts at midget hanging. But there were some other problems with the show, like the medieval chainmail suit I used to wear during a few of the numbers. As soon as I worked up a sweat, it was like being wrapped in razor blades. We also had a lot of trouble with our stage props. This mechanical arm with a giant godlike hand on the end of it would come out from under the drum riser and soar above the audience, with me crouching down in the palm. When the arm was fully extended, flames would shoot out of one of the fingers, and I'd stomp on this pedal by my foot, which would activate a catapult behind me, and about 50 pounds of raw meat would be flung into the audience. Then I'd stand up and shout, "Rock and roll!" It was fucking awesome. But on New Year's Eve, we were at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum and Sports Arena, playing to a crowd of tens of thousands, when everything went wrong. The mechanical arm for the hand got caught up in the carpet on the floor of the stage and started to pull it from under the giant speaker cabinets behind the band, making them wobble like crazy. Finally, the carpet was pulled free, and before I knew it, I was crouching down in the hand as it rose into the air, with this ocean of screaming kids below me. Then it was time for the final gimmick, so I stomped on the pedal beside my foot to activate the catapult, but the elastic just went phoot. And instead of this massive payload of pigs' bollocks and cows' entrails flying into the audience, it smacked me at 20 miles an hour in the back of the head. The last thing I remember is screaming, "Ah!" and feeling all this blood and offal dribbling down the back of my neck. The crowd thought it was all part of the show and went fucking wild. It became one of our trademarks, throwing butchers' offcuts into the audience. But then the audience got involved and the fans started to bring their own meat and throw it at us. It was insane what the kids would bring. It started with just cuts of meat, but then it moved on to entire animals. We had dead cats, birds, lizards, all kinds of stuff. With every gig it just got crazier and crazier. Eventually people started to throw things on stage with nails and razor blades embedded in them. Joke shop stuff mainly, like rubber snakes and plastic spiders. Some of the crew started to get freaked out about it, especially after a real snake ended up on stage one night. And then, on the 20th of January 1982, we played the Veterans Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa. The gig was going great. Then, from out of the audience came this bat. Obviously a tie, I thought. So I held it up to the lights and bared my teeth while Randy played one of his solos. The crowd went mental. Then I did what I always did when we got a rubber tie on stage. Chomp! Immediately, though, something felt wrong. Very wrong. For a start, my mouth was instantly full of this warm, gloopy liquid with the worst aftertaste you could ever imagine. I could feel it staining my teeth and running down my chin. Then the head in my mouth twitched. Oh, fuck me, I thought. I didn't just go and eat a fucking bat, did I? So I spat out the head, looked over into the wings and saw Sharon with her eyes bulging, waving her hand, screaming, "No! It's real, Ozzy!" Next thing I knew, I was being rushed into an emergency room. Meanwhile, a doctor was saying to Sharon, "Yes, Miss Arden, the bat was alive. There's a good chance Mr. Osbourne now has rabies. Symptoms? Oh, malaise, headache, fever, violent twitches, uncontrollable excitement, depression, a pathological fear of liquids." "Not much chance of that," muttered Sharon. "Mania is usually one of the final symptoms. Then the patient gets very lethargic, falls into a coma, and stops breathing." "Isn't there a vaccine?" "It's usually best administered beforehand, but yes, we can give him a shot." Then the doctor went to get a syringe the size of a grenade launcher. "OK, Mr. Osbourne," he said. "You'll need to take off your pants and bend over." I did as he said. "This might sting a bit." That was the last thing I heard. Every night for the rest of the tour, I had to find a doctor and get more rabies shots. One in each arse cheek, one in each thigh, one in each arm. I had more holes in me than a lump of fucking Swiss cheese. But it was better than getting rabies, I suppose. Not that anyone would have noticed the difference if I'd gone insane. Meanwhile, the press were going nuts. If you'd asked anyone on the Diary of a Madman crew which member of the band might not make it through the tour, me, Randy, Rudy or Tommy, they'd have put all their money on me. Sharon was convinced something bad would happen. So whenever I'd been drinking in the hotel, she'd steal all my clothes so there was no way I could leave and get into any trouble. Unless I was prepared to walk down to the lobby stark bollock naked. It worked. Most of the time. But then we got to San Antonio, Texas. As usual, I got shit-faced in the hotel. And, as usual, Sharon nicked my clothes. But she made the mistake of leaving one of her evening gowns in the room. It was this dark green frilly thing. And with a bit of ripping and tearing at the seams, I got it on. Then I found some running shoes. And I was off. So there I was in Sharon's evening dress, on the loose, slinging this bottle of Courvoisier around the streets of San Antonio, looking for trouble. Then I got this sudden urge to take a piss, as you do when you're blasted. But I was in the middle of this strange town in Texas, and I didn't have a clue where the public bogs were. So I looked around, found a quiet corner, and started taking a slash against this crumbly old wall. Then I heard this voice behind me. You disgust me. What? I turn around to see this old-timer in a cowboy hat staring at me like I'd just molested his gran. You're a disgrace, do you know that? My girlfriend nicked my clothes, I explained. It ain't the dress, you limey faggot piece of dirt. That wall you're relieving yourself on is the Alamo. Two fat Texan coppers came puffing round the corner, radios crackling. That's the one, said the old bloke. Him, in the dress. Bam! I was face down in the dirt being handcuffed. It took a moment for it all to click. I'd definitely heard of the Alamo. I'd seen the John Wayne movie a few times, so I knew it was this big deal place where lots of Americans had been killed while they were fighting the Mexicans. But I hadn't made the connection between the old wall I was pissing on and the ruins of a sacred national monument. 10 minutes later, I was sharing a jail cell with a 20-stone Mexican bloke who'd just murdered his wife with a brick, or some crazy shit. I was in the cage for about 3 hours. Some of the cops and their friends came over to look at me. They did me for public intoxication, and they let me out in time for the gig. Although the chief came down personally to tell me that as soon as the show was over, I had to leave town and never show my ugly mug again. That one piss cost me a fortune in lost San Antonio gigs over the years. A few years later, I apologised in person to the mayor and donated 10 grand to the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. He let me play in the town again after that. When I finally went back, I remember this scrawny Mexican kid coming up to me after the show. Ozzy, is it true you got busted for pissing on the Alamo? He asked me. Yeah, I told him, it's true. Shit, man, he said. We piss on it every night on our way home. We were in the tour bus on our way from Tennessee to Florida when Randy broke the news. I don't think I want to be a rock and roller anymore, he said. We were sitting at a little picnic table in the kitchen area of the bus, which was like a 5-star hotel on wheels. It was 3 or 4 in the morning, and me and Randy were the only ones still awake. It was a 700-mile journey from Knoxville to Orlando, and the driver was going like the clappers. How could you quit now? I said to him. Tomorrow night we're playing with Foreigner. Randy just shrugged and said, I want to go to university. Look, I went on, why don't you get some rest? Give yourself a bit of a break, you know. I could say the same thing to you, Ozzy. What do you mean? That's your 4th bottle of gin in 24 hours. You'll kill yourself, you know, said Randy. Good night, Randy, I said, draining my glass. I'm off to bed. When I opened my eyes a few hours later, it was getting light. Sharon was lying next to me in her dressing gown. Then I heard the noise. It sounded like an engine at full revs. Whatever it was that was making the din seemed to move away from the bus, but then all of a sudden it came back, even louder than before. Sharon, I said, what the fuck is that noise? Then my head smashed into the bed frame as all the windows of the bus exploded. I jump out of bed and force open the bedroom door. There are tiny fragments of glass everywhere and a fucking massive hole in the roof. Then I notice that the entire bus has been bent into a V shape. Then I'm coughing from the stench of the fuel and the smoke from the fire outside. And I think, fire and fuel. Oh, fuck. Everyone get out of the fucking bus, I start to shout. It's gonna blow. Panic. Numb legs. Sharon screaming. I was still sozzled from the gin. I ran to the open door at the front of the bus, pulling Sharon along behind me. I jumped out of the bus and landed on the grass. At that point, I thought I must have been dreaming. We were parked in the middle of a field, surrounded by a bunch of over-the-top coke dealer-style mansions. Then, next to one of the houses, a giant fireball. There was wreckage strewn around it. Oh, Jesus Christ. I almost threw up when I saw that shit. Meanwhile, Sharon was trying to do a head count, but people were scattered all over the field. They were just pointing at the flames and wailing and sobbing. Then Sharon went over to Jake Duncan, our Scottish tour manager. Where are Randy and Rachel? All Jake could do was point towards the flames. I don't understand, Sharon said. I didn't understand either. Nobody had said, oh, by the way, Ozzy, on the way to Orlando, we're going to stop off at a bus depot in Leesburg to fix the air conditioning. And the bus depot is part of this dodgy housing estate with an airstrip. Oh, yeah, And your driver, Aycock, who's been up all night out of his mind on cocaine, also happens to be a pilot who's going to borrow some bloke's plane without his permission and then, while you're fast asleep, take your lead guitarist and your makeup artist on a sightseeing trip above the tour bus before dive bombing into it. We only learned the full story much later. Don and Jake were the first to go up with him. Everything was fine. The takeoff and landing went smoothly. Then it was Randy and Rachel's turn. He buzzed the tour bus 2 or 3 times before the wing clipped the roof a few inches from where me and Sharon were sleeping. When the wing hit the bus, Randy and Rachel were thrown through the windscreen, or so I was told. Then the plane, minus its wing, smashed into the trees behind, fell into the garage, and exploded. If I'd been awake, I would have been on that fucking plane, no question. Knowing me, I'd have been on the wing, pissed, doing handstands and backflips. But it makes no sense to me that Randy went up. He hated flying. Rachel had a weak heart, so she would hardly have wanted to do a loop the fucking loop. We checked into some shithole called the Hilco Inn in Leesburg and tried to hide from the press while the police did their thing. You know what? I think this is a sign that I ain't supposed to do this anymore, I said to Sharon. By then I was having a total physical and mental breakdown. A doctor had to come over and shoot me up with sedatives. Sharon wasn't doing much better. The one thing that gave us some comfort was a message from AC/DC saying, "If there's anything we can do, let us know." I'll always be grateful to them for it. The morning after the crash, I called my sister Jean, who told me that my mother had been on a bus when she'd seen a newspaper stand with the headline, "Ozzy Osbourne, air crash death." My poor old mum had gone crazy. Then we had to do 2 funerals in 1 week, and it was fucking heavy duty on all of us. Randy's funeral was held at the First Lutheran Church in Burbank. I was one of the pallbearers. I felt so bad. Randy was one of the greatest guys who'd ever been in my life. Rachel's funeral was at a black gospel church somewhere in South LA. It's a joyous experience, an African-American funeral. The following week I did the David Letterman show. It was surreal, man. Dave was very sympathetic, but I was in no mood for the bat story. All I can say is that I lost 2 of the greatest people in my life, I said, trying not to choke up. But it ain't going to stop me because I'm about rock and roll is for the people, and I love people, and you can't kill rock and roll. If it sounds a bit over the top, it's because I was as pissed as a fart. In private, I wasn't so sure that you couldn't kill rock and roll. It's not meant to be, I kept telling Sharon. Let's call it a day. But she wasn't having any of it. This is what you're meant to do, Ozzy. Nothing's going to stop us. If Sharon hadn't given me that speech a few times, I'd never have gone on a stage again. A few weeks after Randy died, I asked Sharon to marry me. If there's one good thing that could come out of all the shit we've been through on this tour, I told her, it would be making you my wife. She said yes. So I put a ring on her finger and we set a date. Then the booze wore off and I changed my mind. After everything that had gone down with Thelma, I was terrified of going through it all again. But then I got over the fear. I was in love with Sharon. So a few weeks later, I proposed again. "Will you marry me?" I asked her. "Fuck off." I proposed to her 17 times in the end. We got married in Hawaii, on the way to a gig in Japan. It was a small ceremony on the island of Maui. Don Arden showed up, but only because he wanted Sharon to sign some paperwork. My mum and my sister Jean came too. Tommy was my best man. On my wedding night, I didn't even make it back to the room to spend the night with my new wife. At 5 in the morning, the hotel manager had to call her room and say, "Will you please come and get your husband? He's asleep in the corridor and blocking the maids." It wasn't long after that my new father-in-law stopped calling me Ozzy. He took to calling me Vegetable instead. As in, fuck off, vegetable, or die, vegetable, or get out of my fucking house right now, vegetable. Mind you, it was nothing compared with how he'd talked to Sharon. Then the next thing you knew, they were friends again. That's how Sharon was raised, and why she's so extreme. In the end, Sharon found out that Don was having an affair with a girl younger than she was. We left Jet Records, which made Don go apeshit, and we had to pay him $1.5 million to buy out our contract and stop him bankrupting us with lawsuits. Eventually they stopped talking to each other altogether, and the silence continued for almost 20 years. If any good came out of that situation, it was that we borrowed as much dough as we could to buy out all of my contracts, so we weren't controlled by anyone. It wasn't until Sharon found out she was pregnant that she really started to try and change the way I was living. I remember Sharon saying to me, "Right, Ozzy, if you ever bring any cocaine into this house, I'm going to call the police and have you sent to prison. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I said. "And what about the shotguns, Ozzy?" "I'll get rid of them." They were sold the next day. I carried on boozing though. I couldn't stop. But Sharon had lost all patience with that too by then. One time I got this big 4-gallon bottle of vodka, but I couldn't work out where to hide it. Then it came to me. The oven. Sharon had never cooked a meal in her life, I said to myself, so she'd never look in there. I got away with it for weeks. Then one day she twigged. "Sharon," I said, "I've just had an idea for a song. I found your song idea in the oven this morning," she said. "Then I poured your song idea down the sink." It was only a week or so after the oven incident, on the 2nd of September 1983, that Amy was born at the Wellington Hospital in St John's Wood, London. It had been just over a year since Randy and Rachel had died, and we were only just starting to get over it. With Amy, we had a brand new reason to feel good about life. But no sooner had Amy been born than it was time to go on the road again, this time to promote the Bark at the Moon album, which I'd just finished making with my new guitarist, Jake E. Lee. Sharon could have stayed at home, but that wasn't her style, so we put a little cot in the back of the tour bus for Amy and carried on. "Someone's going to die before this is over," I said to Dot McGee, the American manager of Mötley Crùe, on the second night of the Bark at the Moon tour. The problem basically was our support band, Mötley Crùe, which back then still had the original lineup: Nicky Six on bass, Tommy Lee on drums, Mick Mars on guitar, and Vince Neil on vocals. They were fucking crazy. The funniest thing about Mötley Crùe was that they dressed like chicks but lived like animals. Wherever they went, they carried around this massive flight case full of every type of booze imaginable. The moment a gig was over, the lid would be thrown open and the hounds of hell would be set loose. Every night, bottles would be thrown, knives would be pulled, chair legs would be smashed, noses would be broken, property would be destroyed. It was like bedlam and pandemonium rolled into one, then multiplied by chaos. People tell me stories about that tour, and I have no idea if they're true or not. They ask, "Ozzy, did you really once snort a line of ants off a popsicle stick?" And I ain't got a fucking clue. If any of us had a near-death experience on the Bark at the Moon tour, it was me. It happened when we took a 48-hour break after a gig in New Orleans to shoot the video for So Tired in London. When we finally got to the studio in London, the first thing the director said to me was, "Okay, Ozzy, just sit in front of this mirror. When I give you the word, it's going to explode from behind." "All right," I said, wondering what kind of high-tech special effects they were going to use. But there were no special effects. There was just an old mirror and a bloke standing behind it with a hammer in his hand. So halfway through the song, the bloke swings his hammer, the mirror explodes, and I get a face full of glass. It was a good job I was so loaded, I didn't feel a thing. I just spat out all the blood and glass and went, "Yeah, cheers." Then I got up and had another can of Guinness. I didn't think any more of it until I was halfway across the Atlantic on Concorde. I remember pressing the button for another drink and the stewardess coming over and almost dropping her tray with fright. "Oh my God," she squealed, "are you okay?" It turned out the pressure from being up at nearly 60,000 feet had caused all the tiny bits of glass lodged in my skin to rise to the surface until my face had literally exploded. It had just popped like a squashed tomato. When Sharon turned around to look, she almost passed out. An ambulance was waiting for me at JFK when we landed. It wasn't the first time I'd been wheeled off Concorde. I used to get so pissed on those flights, Sharon would have to carry me through immigration on a luggage trolley with my passport sellotaped to my forehead. And then, when they asked her if she'd anything to declare, she'd just point at me and go, "Him." In the hospital in New York, they put me under and tried to pull out as much of the broken glass as they could with tweezers. Then they gave me some drugs to reduce the swelling. I remember coming to in this white room with white walls and people all around me covered in white sheets and thinking, "Fuck, I'm in the morgue." Then I heard a hissing noise next to my bed. Psst, psst. I looked down and there was this kid holding up a pen and a copy of Bark at the Moon. "Will you sign this for me?" he asked. "Fuck off," I told him. "I'm dead." By the time the tour ended, we were all still alive, but my prediction that someone would die still came true. It happened when Vince Neil went back to his house at Redondo Beach in LA and got fucked up with the drummer from Hanoi Rocks. At some point they ran out of booze and decided to drive to the local bottle shop in Vince's car, a bright red Di Tommaso Panteras. Vince was so loaded he drove head-on into a car coming in the opposite direction. The bloke from Hanoi Rocks was dead by the time they got him to hospital. Another thing I did when I was drunk was get more tattoos, which drove Sharon mental. Eventually she said, "Ozzy, if you get one more tattoo, I'm going to string you up by your bollocks." That night, I went out and got thanks tattooed on my right palm. It seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. I mean, how many times do you say thanks to people during your lifetime? Tens of thousands, probably. Now all I had to do was raise my right hand. When Sharon noticed it the next morning, she drove me straight to a plastic surgeon to get the tattoo removed. But he told me he'd have to cut off half of my hand to get rid of the thing, so it stayed. When we left the hospital, Sharon thanked the doctor for his time. I just raised my right palm. Doing crazy stuff always led to another argument with Sharon. On one occasion I lost it so badly with her, I picked up a vodka bottle and threw it in her direction. It missed by an inch, thank God. The neck went straight through the plaster in the wall above her head and just stuck there like a piece of modern art. Sharon would always find ways to retaliate, mind you, like when she'd take a hammer to my gold records. And then I'd retaliate to her retaliation by saying I didn't want to go on stage that night. One time I shaved my head to try and get out of doing a show. She just took one look at me and said, "Right, we're getting you a wig." Then she dragged me and a couple of the roadies to this joke shop, which had a Lady Godiva wig in the window. I rigged it with blood capsules. Halfway through the show, I'd pretend to pull out my hair and all this blood would come running down my face. It looked brilliant. At one gig, this chick in the front row almost fainted. She was screaming and pointing and crying and shouting, "It's true what they say, he is crazy." "Darling," said Sharon, when she found out that she was pregnant with Kelly, "I've heard about this great place in Palm Springs where you can take a break before the next tour. It's a hotel and they have classes every day where they teach you how to drink like a gentleman." "What's the name of this place?" "The Betty Ford Centre. It's just open and it's run by the wife of a former president." "Sounds magic," I said. "Sign me up." "Actually, I've already booked you in for the week after the baby's due," Sharon replied. In the end, Kelly arrived on the 28th of October 1984. It certainly wasn't easy leaving my beautiful little girl only a few hours after she was born, but at the same time, I knew I had to get my drinking under control. I'd never even heard the word rehab before. In my head, I imagined this beautiful oasis of a hotel out in the middle of the Californian desert, with a shimmering swimming pool outside, a golf course, lots of hot chicks in bikinis everywhere, and all these Hugh Hefner types in velvet smoking jackets and bow ties, leaning against an outdoor bar, while a middle-aged woman with a voice like Barbara Woodhouse said, "OK, gentlemen, after me, take the olive, stir it around the martini, pick up the glass with your fingers, arrange like so. That's right, good, good." But when I got there, the place looked more like a hospital than a hotel. I walk in the door and Betty herself is waiting for me. She's a tiny little thing, not much of a sense of humour by the look of it. "Hello, Mr. Osbourne," she says. "I'm Mrs. Ford." "Look, Betty, I'm gasping. Where's the bar?" "You do know where you are, don't you, Mr. Osbourne?" Yeah. So you'll know that we don't have a bar." "Well, how do you teach people to drink properly then?" "Mr. Osbourne, we teach you not to drink here." I can't even begin to describe the disappointment. After 1 hour in that place, I felt like I'd been there 1,000 years. The thing I hated most about the weeks that followed was talking about my drinking in front of all these strangers during the group sessions. I also had to see a therapist on my own. The shrink said that my dyslexia had given me a terrible insecurity complex, so I couldn't take rejection or failure or pressure of any sort, which was why I was self-medicating with booze. The shrink also told me that I have an addictive personality, which means that I do everything addictively. And on top of that, I have an obsessive-compulsive disorder, which makes it all 10 times worse. I'm like a walking dictionary of psychiatric disorders, I am. It blew my mind. Eventually, Sharon came to get me. I'd been in there 6 weeks. I looked better, I'd lost a bit of weight, but I'd got the whole rehab thing wrong. I thought it was supposed to cure me, but there ain't no cure for what I've got. All rehab can do is tell you what's wrong with you and then suggest ways for you to get better. The first gig I did after Betty Ford was in Rio de Janeiro. I was legless before I even got on the plane. The gig was Rockin' Rio, a 10-day festival featuring Queen, Rod Stewart, AC/DC and Yes. 1.5 million people bought tickets, but I was disappointed by the place. I'd expected to see the girl from Ipanema on every corner, but there were just all these dirt-poor kids running around like rats. People were either outrageously rich or living on the streets. There didn't seem to be anything in between. I'll always remember meeting Ronnie Biggs, the great train robber, on that trip. In those days he was living in exile in Brazil, and he seemed to be making the best of it. He claimed he shagged 2,500 chicks while he was there. But it was still a kind of prison for him because he was so homesick. He just kept asking, "So what's it like in England, Ozzy?" The summer after Rockin' Rio, I agreed to do Live Aid with Black Sabbath. I hadn't talked to Tony for years, so it wasn't exactly the most comfortable of situations. It didn't get off to a good start. When I was in the lobby of the hotel, checking in before the gig, this bloke comes up to me and says, "Hey Ozzy, can I have a photograph?" And I go, "Sure, yeah." Then the bloke goes, "Sorry, I have to do this," and hands me a lawsuit. It was from my father-in-law. He'd served me before a fucking charity gig. On the one hand, doing Live Aid was brilliant. It was for a great cause, and no one can play those old Black Sabbath songs like me, Tony, Geezer and Bill. But on the other hand, it was all a bit embarrassing. For a start, I was still grossly overweight. On the video, I'm the size of a planet. Also, in the 6 years since I'd left the band, I'd become a celebrity in America, whereas Black Sabbath had been going in the other direction. But the gig went smoothly enough. A few months after Live Aid, on the 8th of November 1985, Jack was born. It was crazy, really, because I ended up touring the world as the Prince of Darkness with 3 little kids in tow, which wasn't exactly good for the image. As much as I was drunk and absent a lot of the time, I love being a dad. They're the best things that ever happened to me, no question about it. Then AIDS came along. One night, I bonked this chick in the Sunset Marquis Hotel in West Hollywood. For a few days, I drove myself halfway insane with worry. Then I blurted everything out to Sharon. Think of that 100-megaton bomb the Russians once set off in the Arctic. That was Sharon when I told her that I had to get an HIV test because I'd bonked some dodgy chick from a hotel bar. It was such a bad scene. I began to think that being dead might actually be better than being alive for another bollocking. Anyway, I got the test. I went with Sharon to get the results. I'll never forget the doctor getting out his file and going, "Well, Mr. Osbourne, I'm afraid there is no easy way to tell you this," he said as my whole body went numb with fear. "But you're HIV positive." I literally fell to my knees, put my hands over my head and screamed, "That's a fucking death sentence, you arsehole!" Then the phone on the doctor's desk rang. I was still on my knees and screaming at this point, but I soon shut up when I realised it was the lab calling about my results. Actually, Mr. Osbourne, you don't seem to have HIV. But basically, your immune system currently isn't functioning at all. First, the lab couldn't understand it. Then they came across there are some lifestyle factors that probably explain the anomaly. Lifestyle factors? Your blood contains near-fatal quantities of alcohol and cocaine, Mr. Osbourne, not to mention a number of other controlled substances. The lab's never seen anything like it. So I really don't have HIV? No, but your body thinks it does. Well, that's a relief. Mr. Osbourne, you might not be HIV positive, but your life is still in grave danger if you don't take it easier. Mind you, I did change my lifestyle in one way. I never cheated on Sharon again. With the AIDS crisis over, I flew back to England to prepare for the next tour. I'd only been back a week or two when I got a frantic call from Sharon, who was still in California. Ozzy, get on the next plane out here. 15 hours later, I was walking through immigration at LAX when about 10,000 flashbulbs went off. Then a reporter shoved a TV camera in my face and said, "What do you think, Ozzy, about the dead kid? Any comment on the suicide?" About 10 security guards pushed the cameraman out of the way and bundled me into a black limo. Waiting on the back seat was Howard Weitzman, my lawyer. "The kid's name is, or rather was, John McCallum," he explained, handing me a copy of the Los Angeles Times. 19 years old, big fan of yours. According to his parents, he was drinking and listening to Speak of the Devil when he shot himself with his father's gun. And they're blaming it all on you." "Me?" "The father says his son was just doing what the lyrics of Suicide Solution told him to do." "Has he actually read the lyrics?" "That's not all, Ozzy. They're saying that your songs have subliminal messages embedded in them, instructing the young and impressionable to get a gun, end it now, shoot, shoot, shoot. That kind of thing." "How much are they suing me for?" "Everything, plus damages. We're on our way to a press conference right now." At the press conference, the reporters were throwing questions at me so hard and so fast, I almost wanted to duck for cover. One guy said, "Listen, Mr. Osbourne, isn't it true that you sing on one of your songs, Paranoid, 'I tell you to end your life'?" I had to take a moment to run through Geeze's lyrics in my head. "No, I sing 'Enjoy Life.'" But the other reporters were already shouting their follow-up questions, so no one could hear. Finally, it was over, and I went back to the hotel, flopped down on the bed, flicked on the TV, and there was Don Arden discussing the case. "To be perfectly honest, I would be doubtful as to whether Mr. Osbourne knew the meaning of the lyrics because his command of the English language is minimal," he said. I suppose it was his way of showing support. I became public enemy number one in America. I started to get death threats wherever I went. One guy built a tomb so that me and him could spend the rest of eternity together. I could think of better fucking things to do with eternity, to be honest with you. The Jesus freaks were the worst. While the Suicide Solution case was going through the courts, they followed me around everywhere. The death threats were coming in pretty much every day. So I had this security guy, a Vietnam vet called Chuck, who was with me all the time. Chuck was so hardcore, whenever we stayed in a hotel, he'd spend the night crawling around on his belly through the undergrowth in the garden or doing push-ups in the corridor. One time, before a gig in Tyler, Texas, I was sitting in this coffee shop when this guy comes in and says, "Are you Ozzy Osbourne?" "Yeah." It was a preacher from the telly, and it turned out the coffee shop was full of his disciples. So as soon as he started to do his naughty Jesus bullshit, all these other people joined in, until I was surrounded by 40 or 50 Jesus freaks, all spitting out the same words. "Put Satan behind you! Put Jesus in front of you!" Then Chuck went fucking mental, stage 5 psycho. The guy must have taken down about 15 of the Jesus freaks in the first 10 seconds. There were teeth and Bibles and glasses flying everywhere. I just elbowed the preacher in the nuts and legged it. The Suicide Solution lawsuit was filed in January 1986 and was thrown out in August of that year. At the court hearing, Howard Weitzman told the judge that if they were going to ban Suicide Solution and hold me responsible for some poor kid shooting himself, then they'd have to ban Shakespeare, because Romeo and Juliet's about suicide too. He also said that the song lyrics were protected by the right of free speech in America. The judge agreed, but his summing up wasn't exactly friendly. He said that although I was totally objectionable and repulsive, trash can be given First Amendment protection too. I had to read that sentence about 5 times before I realised that the bloke had actually ruled in our favour. After I'd come out of the Betty Ford Centre, I'd started to say to myself, well, I might be an alcoholic, but I have a perfect job for an alcoholic, so maybe it's kind of all right that I'm an alcoholic. In a way, it was true. I mean, what other occupation rewards you for being out of your brains all the time? The more loaded I was when I got on stage, the more the audience knew it was going to be a good night. The trouble was, deep down, I knew that all the booze and drugs had turned sour on me, that I'd stopped being funny and zany and had started to become sad. I woke up groaning. I was lying on a bare concrete floor in a square room. It had bars on the window, a bucket in the corner, and human shit up the walls. The only thing left in my pockets was a scrunched-up receipt from my local Chinese restaurant, the Dynasty. I pictured the inside of the place, red like hell, and saw myself sitting in one of the leather booths arguing with Sharon and crushing powder and pills in a pestle and mortar. What the fuck had I been doing last night? I tried to think what my drunk, coked-up, evil twin brother could have done to put me behind bars, but my brain was blank. I'd been warned about blackouts when I went to the Betty Ford Centre. The doc told me that my tolerance would eventually hit 0 and then my body and brain would shut down. "Hello?" I shouted. "Anybody there?" Finally, this copper showed up. "Will someone please tell me what I'm doing in this place?" He just stood there, looking at me like I was a cockroach in his dinner. "Why don't I just read you the charges? John Michael Osbourne, you are hereby charged with the attempted murder by strangulation of your wife Sharon Osbourne during a domestic disturbance that took place in the early hours of Sunday the 3rd of September 1989 at Beale House, Little Chalfont in the county of Buckinghamshire." I staggered backwards, fell against the shit-smeared wall, then slumped onto the floor, head in my hands. "Is she all right?" "Her husband just tried to kill her. How do you think she is?" "But why would I do that? I don't understand." "Well, it says here that after returning home from a Chinese restaurant, during which time you became heavily intoxicated on Russian vodka, you walked into the bedroom naked and said, I quote, 'We've had a little talk and it's clear that you have to die.'" "It can't be true," I said. "I'd never tried to kill her." But of course it could be true. Sharon had been saying for years that she never knew which version of me was going to walk through the front door, bad Ozzy or good Ozzy. "You're up for attempted murder, you pisshead. Your wife could very well be dead if others in the house hadn't heard her screaming." They kept me in the cell for about 36 hours in the end. Then I had to go to Beaconsfield Magistrates Court. The courtroom was a zoo. The judge granted me bail on the condition that I went into rehab immediately, didn't contact Sharon or attempt to go back to Beale House. "Ozzy," went in the press. "Is it true that Sharon wants a divorce? Is it true about the affair, Ozzy?" Tony had already booked me into a rehab place, Huntercombe Manor, about 20 minutes away. On the way we passed the newsagents. "Death threat Ozzy sent to booze clinic," said the sandwich board outside. Feels strange, you know, when you see the most private moments of your life put on display like that. I must have been in that joint for a couple of months in the end. Eventually, Sharon came to visit. I told her how sorry I was, how much I loved her, how much I wanted to keep our family together. But I knew it was useless. "Ozzy," she said in this low, quiet voice, "I'm going to drop the charges." "What? Why?" "I don't believe you're capable of attempted murder, Ozzy. You're a sweet, gentle man, but when you get drunk, Ozzy Osbourne disappears and someone else takes over. I want that other person to go away, Ozzy. I don't want to see him again. Ever." "I'm going to stop," I said. "I promise." I went on a big mission to clean myself up after rehab. I lost a lot of weight. Then I went to a plastic surgeon to get 44 of my 45 chins removed. And I managed to stay off the booze for quite a while, even though I hardly ever went to the AA meetings. I'll get up and sing my heart out in front of 200,000 people at a rock festival, but when I've got to talk about the way I feel to people I've never met before, I can't do it. I reckon the album I did after coming out of Huntercombe Manor, No More Tears, was my best in years. Everything about that album seemed to go right. My new guitarist, Zach Wilde, was a genius. My producers were amazing, and Sharon got the artwork spot on. The cover is a sepia portrait of me with an angel's wing on my shoulder. The idea was to give the album more of a mature vibe. I mean, I couldn't keep doing the blood out of the mouth thing. It was starting to get hammy. I might have been sober after No More Tears, but whatever I'd cut out in booze, I was making up for with pills. My health took a real dive around that time. I started to notice a tremor in my hand. My speech was slurred. I was always exhausted. I tried to escape from it all by getting loaded, but I developed such a tolerance to all the drugs I was taking, I had to overdose to get high. The worse I got, the more I worried that Sharon would leave me. Sharon saved my life. Sharon is my life, and I love her. But as much as I wanted everything to be normal and right, I was terribly sick, physically and mentally. I couldn't even face being on stage anymore. So I decided to retire. In 1992, I went on tour to promote No More Tears. We called it the No More Tours Tour. I was done. I'd been on the road for 25 years pretty much. I was like a mouse on a wheel. Album, tour, album, tour, album, tour. I thought, why am I doing this? Then, when we got back to England, Sharon said, "Don't go crazy, but I've bought us a new house." "Where?" "It's called Welder's House, in a village called Jordans in Buckinghamshire." When we finally moved in, it was magic. The weather was perfect that summer, and suddenly I had all this land and I could just fuck around all day on my quad bikes without having to worry about anything. My health improved dramatically. But as soon as I felt better, I got bored. Crazy bored. Then I thought, how can I retire at the age of 46? So one morning I said to Sharon, all casual, "Can't you get me a gig in one of those American festivals this year?" So she called the organisers of Lollapalooza, and they told her to fuck off. "Ozzy Osbourne is a fucking dinosaur," they said in not so many words. That wound Sharon up no end, as you can imagine. "Screw it, we'll do our own bloody festival." "What are you planning to call this festival?" "Ozfest." It was fucking perfect. Our strategy was to take all the undesirables, all the bands that couldn't find an outlet anywhere else, put them together and give them an audience. In 1996, we were ready. We started out small in just 2 cities, Phoenix and Los Angeles, as part of my tour to promote the Osmosis album, the Retirement Socks Tour, as it was known. It was a monster from day one. As soon as it was over, Sharon turned to me and said, "Do you know who'd be the perfect band to headline Ozfest 97? "Who?" "Black Sabbath." "What? Are you kidding? I think Tony's the only one left, and their last album didn't even chart, did it?" "No, the real Black Sabbath. You, Tony, Geezer and Bill, back together after 18 years. "Yeah, right. It's time, Ozzy. Hatchet's buried. Once and for all." That summer, we went out on the road. Even though I've always played Sabbath songs on stage, it's never as good as when the 4 of us do them. Today, when I listen to the recordings of those shows, we put them out the following year on an album called Reunion, I still get chills. I was back in LA, staying at a rented place in Malibu, when the phone rang about my mother. My mum was 87 and she'd been ill for a while. I went to see her for a few days. Mum sat up in bed for hours talking to me with her arm hooked up to this whirring and bleeping dialysis machine. "John," she said, "are you really a millionaire?" "Oh, I don't really want to talk about it." "Oh, go on, John, tell me. Please." "Okay then. Yeah, I am." She smiled, and I thought, well, at least I finally made her happy. After that, we said our goodbyes and I flew back to California with Tony. As soon as I landed, I had to go and do a gig with Black Sabbath at the Universal Amphitheatre. After the gig, I went back to the house in Malibu. When I opened the door, the phone was ringing. It was Norman, my brother-in-law. "John," he said, "she's gone." I sobbed, man. I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. I couldn't face the funeral. I didn't want it to be a press event with people asking me for a photograph outside the church. I just wanted my mum to go out in peace, without it being all about me. So I didn't go. The first time we allowed TV cameras into our house was in 1997, the year Black Sabbath got back together. We were renting Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith's old place in Beverly Hills. I don't think the TV guys could believe what they were seeing most of the time. On the first day, I remember this producer turning to me and saying, "Is it always like this?" "Like what?" "A sitcom." "What do you mean a sitcom? We're not trying to be funny, you know." "I know. That's what makes it so funny." A company called September Films made the documentary Ozzy Osbourne Uncut, they called it, and it was shown on Channel 5 in Britain and the Travel Channel in America. People went crazy over it. I don't think anyone could get over the fact that we had to deal with the exact same boring day-to-day bullshit as any other family. The documentary won a Rose d'Or award at the Montreux TV Festival in Switzerland, and all of a sudden everyone wanted to make TV stars out of us. MTV ended up offering us a show of our own. As far as I was concerned, I just woke up one morning and we had this thing to do called the Osbournes. I was happy for Sharon because she loved all the chaos in the house. She loved doing TV too. She'll openly say, "I'm a TV-ooer." A few days before we agreed to the filming, we had a family meeting to make sure the kids were okay with it. We weren't surprised when Jack and Kelly said they were all for the Osbournes. Amy felt differently though. She didn't want anything to do with it. I have to admit, it was a laugh for a week or two. But then it was like, how much longer is this going to go on? I mean, if you'd have taken me aside after those first few weeks of filming in 2001 and told me that I'd still be doing it 3 years later, I'd have shot myself in the balls just to get out of it. But I didn't have a fucking clue. The show was broadcast for the first time on the 5th of March 2002, a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, it was like I'd moved to another planet. One minute I was a dinosaur who'd been told to fuck off by Lollapalooza. The next I was strapped to a rocket and being blasted through the stratosphere at warp factor 10. When you've got a hit TV show in America, that's as big as it gets fame-wise. It was terrifying, man. I mean, I ain't complaining because the Osbournes had given me a completely new audience, but the whole thing felt like Beatlemania on LSD. So I fucked off back to England to get away from it. But the moment I got off the plane at Heathrow, there was this wall of flashbulbs and thousands of people shouting and screaming and go, "Oi, Ozzy, gives a picture." Obviously, I was no longer famous for being a singer. I was famous for being that swearing bloke on the telly, which felt very strange and not always in a good way. I got a lot of flack for it too. Some people said that I'd sold out because I was on the telly, but that's a load of bollocks, that is. I've always believed that you've got to move with the times. When I was on the show, I never pretended to be anyone other than who I am. Mind you, there are things that happened on the Osbournes that I still can't get my head around. Like when Sharon got a call from Greta von Susteren, one of the anchors on Fox News. "I was wondering if you and Ozzy wanted to have dinner next week with the President of the United States," she said. When Sharon told me, I couldn't believe it. "What does President Bush want to talk about anyway?" I said. "Black Sabbath?" "Don't worry," said Sharon. "It's the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner. Fox News has a table, so there'll be plenty of other people there." "George Bush used to be the governor of Texas, didn't he?" I said. "Yes." "Well, I pissed on the Alamo thing once. He's going to be cool with that, is he?" "I'm sure he's forgotten all about it, Ozzy. He used to like a drink or two himself, you know." "He did? Oh, yeah." So off we went to Washington. The dinner was at the Hilton, where Ronald Reagan had been shot. I had to cling onto Greta's jacket just to get through the crowd. Then the dinner started, and I started to have this horrendous panic attack. There I was, this half-baked rock star in a room with all these great brains and the leader of the free world. What the fuck was I doing there? In the end, I just snapped. So I grabbed a little bottle of vino from one of the waiters. Then I got another. Meanwhile, Sharon was glaring at me from the other end of the table. I ignored her. Then the First Lady walked into the room with George W. Bush following her. And the first thing he said when he reached the podium was, "Laura and I are honoured to be here tonight. Thanks for the invitation. What a fantastic audience we have tonight. Washington power brokers, celebrities, Hollywood stars, and Ozzy Osbourne." By that time, I was well and truly blasted. So as soon as I heard my name, I jumped up on the table like a drunken arsehole and screamed, "Yeah!" It brought the fucking house down. But I was fucked, so I didn't know when to stop. I just stayed up there going, "Yee-haw!" until the whole room of 1,800 people went silent. Bush looked at me. "Yee-haw!" I screamed again. Silence. "Yee!" "Okay, Ozzy," snapped Bush. On the tape, you can even hear him say, "This might have been a mistake." I finally climbed down from the table. Actually, I think Greta might have pulled me down. Then Bush started to tell this joke about me. "The thing about Ozzy is he's made a lot of big hit recordings. Party with the Animals, Face in Hell, Bloodbath in Paradise." I was about to get back up on the table and tell him that none of those were big hits, but then he delivered the punchline. "Ozzy," he said, "Mom loves your stuff." The whole room went crazy. I don't remember much after that. A month later, I met the Queen. She came up to me and shook my hand after I'd done a song at the Party at the Palace concert during the Golden Jubilee weekend. Magnificent woman, I've always thought. Then I met her again not long after at the Royal Variety performance. I was standing next to Cliff Richard. She took one look at the two of us, said, "Oh, so this is what they call variety, is it?" Then cracked up laughing. I honestly thought that Sharon must have slipped some acid into my cornflakes that morning. For a while after the Osbournes went on air, it seemed like everyone in the world wanted to be around me. Then we had a party at our house, and Elizabeth Taylor showed up. Of all the people I got to meet, though, the most special was probably Paul McCartney. I mean, I'd looked up to that man since I was 14. We were at Elton John's birthday party. Paul on one side of me, Sting on the other, and Elton opposite. It was like I'd died and gone to rock star heaven. He played at the Brits when me and Sharon were hosting. I remember Sharon turning to me halfway through his set and whispering, "Did you ever think you'd be standing on stage with a Beatle?" "Never in a million years," was the answer. By the summer of 2002, it seemed like the Osbournes was the biggest thing on the planet, and the stress of it was killing me. My tremor was so bad that I was shaking like an epileptic. My speech was terrible. If someone asked me a question, I would panic, and by the time the words reached my mouth from my brain, they would be all jumbled. I remember watching some clips from the Osbournes, and even I didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I mean, I've never had a problem playing the clown, but when it became a national joke that no one could understand a fucking word I said, it was a bit different. Then Sharon discovered she had cancer. The first thing she said to me was, "I'm going to deal with this." The crew from MTV said, "Look, it's okay if you want us all to go home now. It's your decision." But Sharon wouldn't have any of it. "This is reality TV," she said. "It doesn't get any more fucking real than this. Keep your cameras rolling." I thought it was very courageous of her to say that. Looking back now, I had a full-on nervous breakdown in July 2002, which was made 10 times worse by all that shit I was putting down my neck. It's not enough to say that I love Sharon. I owe my life to Sharon. The thought of losing her was unbearable. Sharon's operation was on the 3rd of July 2002. Days later, the lab confirmed that the cancer had spread into her lymph nodes. She'd have to go through months of horrific chemotherapy. They were the darkest, most miserable, terrible, fucked up days of my life. And I can't even begin to imagine how bad it must have been for Sharon. Almost immediately, her hair started to fall out, so she had to get hair pieces made. And every time she got zapped by the chemo, she'd come home so badly dehydrated because of all the vomiting, she'd have a seizure. I got a team of nurses to live with us at Doheny Road. I also got my agent to call Robin Williams to ask him if he would come over and cheer up Sharon. So he came over one day when I'd gone off to the studio, and apparently Sharon was crying with laughter the whole afternoon. To this day, I think that's the greatest gift I've ever given my wife, and I'm forever in Robin's debt for it. When the chemo was over, Sharon's cancer seemed to have been completely destroyed. When she got the all clear, you couldn't see her for dust. When we started to film the Osbournes, Sharon hadn't spoken to her father for almost 20 years. Then I got a call from Sharon's brother David with the bad news that Don had Alzheimer's. Sharon finally decided she wanted to see him again, so he came back into our lives. He even ended up in a couple of episodes of the Osbournes. And I was happy about it, you know, even though he called me vegetable for most of the time I knew him. Then when Sharon decided she wanted to renew our wedding vows, she was still going through chemo at the time, we made Don part of the ceremony, which we held on New Year's Eve at the Beverly Hills Hotel. A lot of people came up to me that night and asked, "How come you and Sharon have stayed together all this time?" My answer was the same then as it is now. I've never stopped telling my wife that I love her. I've never stopped taking her out for dinner. I've never stopped surprising her with little gifts. Unfortunately, back then, I'd never stopped drinking and taking drugs either, so the ceremony ended much the same as our original wedding had, with me slumped in a corridor, pissed out of my brains. I felt bad for Jack. He took Sharon's cancer as hard as I did, to the point where he ended up on OxyContin, which they call hillbilly heroin in LA. I remember we had this huge row about it, and I said, "What the fuck, Jack? Why are you going around getting pissed all the time? What have you ever wanted for?" He just looked at me and said, "A father." I won't forget that moment in a hurry. I'd been promising to do a song for Kelly ever since I named one of the tracks on Osmosis after Amy. So we did Changes, one of my favourite songs of all time, with the lyrics changed slightly for a father and daughter. It was so good, I thought we might have a Christmas #1 on our hands. Then we flew back to England in December to promote it. I got through an appearance with Kelly on Top of the Pops with no problems. Then I drove up to Welder's house with my assistant Tony for the weekend. I had this Yamaha Banshee 350cc quad bike, like a bullet on wheels, and I'd gone it around the fields for hours on end. So I spent most of the weekend doing just that. And on Monday morning, 8th of December, the day Changes went on sale, I took the bike out again. I remember racing ahead along this dirt trail, then slamming on the brakes as I went down a steep embankment. It had a little lever that you pushed to go faster. The front wheels hit a pothole, my right hand slipped off the handlebar and slammed into the lever. The engine went fucking crazy, and the whole thing shot out from under me and did a backflip in the air, throwing me onto the grass. For about a millionth of a second I thought, oh well, that wasn't so bad. Then the bike landed on top of me. Crack. When I opened my eyes, my lungs were full of blood and my neck was broken, or so my doctors told me later. Okay, now I'm dying, I thought. I can't remember much of the next 2 weeks. Apparently the last thing I did before losing consciousness was to pull on a doctor's sleeve and whisper in his ear, "Whatever you do, don't fuck up my tattoo." Sharon was in LA, so Tony called her and put the chief doc on the line. He told her everything and they agreed I had to go straight into surgery. As well as breaking my neck, I'd fractured 8 of my ribs and punctured my lungs. Meanwhile, when my collarbone broke, it cut through a main artery in my arm. Once they were done operating on me, they put me into a chemical coma because it was the only way I was going to be able to handle the pain. They kept me under for 8 days in the end. Then they started to bring me slowly back to consciousness. "Ozzy? Ozzy, can you hear me?" It was Sharon. I opened my eyes. Sharon smiled and dabbed at her face with a tissue. "I've got news for you," she said, squeezing my hand. "You and Kelly are at #1. You finally fucking did it." "With Changes?" "Yes, you even broke a record, Ozzy. It's never taken anyone 33 years from having their first song in the charts to getting a #1. Only Lulu has even come close." I managed to smile. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" I said. Then I laughed. Not a good idea with 8 broken ribs. Eventually I made a full recovery, or as full as anyone could expect. My short-term memory seemed worse, but maybe that was just age, or the sleeping pills. And my rib cage is still full of screws and bolts and metal rods. When I walk through an airport metal detector these days, a klaxon goes off in the Pentagon. Once I was out of the wheelchair and the neck brace, it was time to renegotiate our contract with MTV. Again. But I couldn't face another season of the Osbournes. Enough was enough. By 2005 the show was over, but I like to think we made our mark on TV. One of the great things about the show was that it allowed Sharon to go off and have a successful career in TV. When she got the gig as a judge on The X Factor, she loved it, and now she's having the time of her life doing America's Got Talent. I must say, I thought my life would become a bit more normal after the Osbournes ended. Fat fucking chance. I nearly murdered a cat burglar in the middle of the night in my own bathroom. I swear this kind of crazy shit only ever happens to me. Anyway, the break-in happened just before dawn on Monday the 22nd of November 2004. I woke up bussing for a piss. I'd just got out of bed, stark bollock naked, and walked into the bathroom, switched on the lights and lifted up the toilet seat, and as I did so, I glanced towards Sharon's dressing table. There he was, a bloke about my height, dressed head to toe in black, a ski mask over his face, crouched down, but with nowhere to hide. It's hard to describe the kind of fright you get when something like that happens. But then the urgency of the situation takes over. As soon as he knew that I'd seen him, the bloke legged it to the window and tried to climb out. I ran after him and got him in a headlock before he could get his whole body through the gap. So there he is, this cat burglar, on his back with his eyes twinkling up at me, and I've got my arm around his throat. Suddenly I'm thinking, right, what now? In the end, I just threw the fucker out the window, which was on the second floor. I could hear him crash through the branches of a tree on his way down. Then I watched him hobbling across the field, yelping with every step. He got away with 2 million quid's worth of jewellery, and the cops never caught him. I can honestly say I never expected to last into my 7th decade, never mind still be viable. The other week I bumped into Keith Richards at an awards show. "How you doing, Keith?" I asked him. He replied, "Oh, not bad for a living legend." I almost said, "Living? Keith, you and me are the walking fucking dead." I don't go out much when I'm not on the road. I don't need to. I've got my wife, my friends, my dogs, all 17 of them, and I've got my land. And you should see our new house up in Hidden Hills. Talk about a rock star mansion. When I'm lying in bed, all I have to do is press a button and this giant flat-screen TV rises out of the floor and dangles above my head. It ain't a bad life, put it that way. These days, I spend much more time with my family than I ever did when I was drinking. Amy, Kelly and Jack are doing great, and I see Jess and Louie all the time now too. Things are okay with Black Sabbath, but at the moment there's an issue over who owns the name. My position is that we should all own it equally. We'll see what happens, but I hope it gets resolved because I have the greatest respect for Tony Iommi. I haven't spoken to Geezer for a while. He's always got his nose in a book, but I've kept in touch with Bill. I suppose the one ambition I have left is to get a #1 album in America. But if I don't live a day longer, I'll have had more than my fair share. I've said to Sharon, I want to be put in the ground in a nice garden somewhere, with a tree planted over my head. A crabapple tree, preferably, so the kids can make wine out of me and get pissed out of their heads. As for what they'll put on my headstone, I ain't under any illusions. If I close my eyes, I can already see it. Ozzy Osbourne, born 1948, died whenever. He bit the head off a bat.
Hello, my name is Chris Ayres, and I'm here with Ozzy Osbourne at his house in Hidden Hills, California, to talk about his new book, I Am Ozzy. Hi, Ozzy.
Hi, Chris.
I wanted to ask you, there's a lot of stuff in this book about your family, going, all the way back to when you were growing up in Aston, Birmingham.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to write about such personal things?
No, it wasn't difficult to write about personal things. Unlike a lot of people who get successful, they never want to talk about where they come from or they glamorise you. I mean, I'm not afraid to. I'm proud of the fact where I come from. I'm proud of the fact that I come from a working class background to where I am now. It's like everybody's dream to do what I did, But along the way, it's been a bumpy road. Along, I had the highs and the lows like everybody else, but it's been more extreme than most people, I suppose.
Were you worried about upsetting any of your brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much growing up. It's kind of like we did things together as a family, whether we were happy, sad, glad, or mad, But it's very touchy because families are really strange. For instance, I'm finding out things about my father and my mother now, which I don't think, for instance, I had that tremor. When in the book they thought I had Parkinson's.
Yes.
I later found out it was a hereditary tremor.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it to my oldest sister, Jenny, on my phone every single weekend. Every Sunday I phone my sister just to check in and everybody's okay.
Yeah.
And I told her about it and she said, "Oh, not you as well." I go, "What do you mean not me as well?" "Oh, Mum, I did, Dad, I did this one, I did that one, I did." I was going,
And you never knew that before?
I'm going, don't you think somebody could have said, well, if you start shaking around the planet at the age of 45 or something, it's all right, you know. Nobody, you know, back then we didn't talk about dangers, you know, the cigarettes, tobacco, marriage, or having kids, the responsibility. We just my father and mother never. You just had to make it up as you go along, I suppose. So with me and my family, I made sure that what I thought would be the right thing to do was to tell them along the way. But even still, that don't help much because they still do what they want to do anyway.
Did you mention that your one of your sisters has got a stammer as well? Is that?
When she was younger, she had a stammer, but I think I don't know what the cause of that. I mean, I think when the Osbourne clan get overwrought and excited, it starts to the speech gets weird.
And you.
But my brother, I found my youngest brother a couple of months ago, and I couldn't understand a word he was saying. And then I heard what saw me on an advert, and I'm going, I don't know what I'm saying.
And when you were looking into your family history, you found some examples of mental illness as well, didn't you? You have an aunt who killed herself?
No, one of my aunts committed suicide. I don't know whether it's I don't. Maybe I'll find out in the next phone call to my sister.
Yeah.
I mean, things back then never ever got talked about. Like, for instance, you'd go and have a family get together, and all the uncles and aunts would be there, and you say, "Well, what happened to Uncle so and so?" Who? And the people would just disappear. If somebody come on pregnant, they just disappeared, you know. People, back then it was a different world completely different world. There was a lot of shame, I suppose. If somebody, I mean, when I was a kid, if somebody, I only knew one person who got divorced, and it was like the taboo. Divorce was like, wow, it was on. So back then people would just stick it out. They're married or they're married, and they would just stick it out, you know.
Yeah. Are there parts of the book that, I mean, a lot of the stuff I just couldn't believe. Are there going to be things in this book that your family or friends read and they just won't know that that's what happened? And
no, as I said,
very shocking things. Or do you think they'll have heard you tell all these stories?
I mean, there's things that people won't. I mean, it's like when you have an accident and you've got like 5 witnesses. Everyone will have a kind of overall view of it, but everyone will have their own take on it. So the one thing I'm kind of trying to hope people don't do, they don't go, oh, his sister was that, and his mum was that, and his dad was that, and his first wife was this. I mean, I've only tried to put it down as much as I can bear with, because, I mean, there's everybody's got a different take on it, you know. I mean, for instance, there was one story about when my mother, is that in the book about my mother cooking the cabbage with a Brillo pen?
Yeah.
My sister it's got the same story, but a different take on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only as your memory corrodes, you remember the main bit, but a thing around it. It's like change. It's like telling the same joke. It's a different. The punchline is virtually the same.
Yes.
The stories leading up to the punchline is somewhat changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are, you know, that's one of the beauties of writing a memoir is that, you know, it is how you remember it, and you know, especially with stories like that. But in terms of your more like the hair-raising stories from the 70s, the sort of excess, the groupies, the drugs, the stuff that, I mean, it's some of it's hilarious. A lot of it makes you want to go out and do the same thing.
No, let me tell you something.
Sound like the most fun thing.
I don't want whoever reads this book, I don't want it to get like it's Ozzy Osbourne survived all that, and so we can have a go. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm living. I think I'm living on borrowed time right now. Right? I'm not. I don't want anybody to read into this as if it was a glamorous existence, because most of the time it wasn't that glamorous. It was. But when you got to do a show and you've been on a bender for the last couple of days, and you got to go and do a show, it's the longest 2 hours of your life, you know.
I can imagine.
And at the end of the day, I couldn't stand me being like that. I mean, I never thought I could exist without alcohol or drugs. I don't smoke anymore. I don't do drugs anymore. I drink alcohol. I haven't done that for 5 or 6 years now, and it's okay being sober, you know. But you know, and the cocaine thing now is an epidemic thing now. Don't kill yourselves doing it.
I think by the time you get to the end of the book, the cost of the way you were living is extremely clear, and there's a lot of very. I mean,
that part in the story when I went to that rehab, and they asked me to jot down how much I think alcohol and drugs has cost me over the years, and I was being big-headed and bravado and writing double figures instead of. You know, but actually, that was nothing to the real cost when it comes to lawsuits, prison, divorces, loss of this, doing that, not turning up for one show, and we had to pay everybody involved. It's catastrophic when you realise how much damage you do. But you know, I never went into a pub and going, right, I'm going to go home, I'm going to have 1 pint now, I'm going to go home. Oh, when I went into a pub, I went to the pub to get absolutely shit-faced. That was my idea of a drink.
Yeah. But do you regret a lot of that now? Because when you read the book, there's a terrible cost to what you did. I mean, to you.
No, but you know, I can't regret anything because as luck has have it, I got out. You know, what I'm thinking now. Why didn't I see this before I did? You know, but then again, as I said, I believe in fate. Yeah. You know, I've said to you as before. When I die, something stupid like with a quad bike accident, for instance, 4 miles an hour down an embankment, and I broke my neck, cracked my ribs, died twice on the way to the hospital. That's you think of all the craziest things I've done in my life, and something trivial like 4 miles an hour, and I end up doing all that damage. And I've still got iron bars doing to this day.
What do you think you're like to be around and work with now that you're sober? Because I've only known you sober, so and you're obviously a pleasure to work with.
Put it this way: if I was still drinking, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Yeah. I'd be passed out in the garden somewhere. I mean, I'm not proud of those years. I mean, I hurt a lot of people along the way, and I'm not proud of that. You know, what can I do? I can't put back the clock. I mean, in the program of recovery, I have to make an amends whenever possible. But I've made some amends, but there's a lot of people just trying to go fuck yourself, you know.
Do you worry about going back, about relapsing, and because at this point,
well, every you know, people say, I mean, I've got 6 years under my belt, so 5 or 6 years under my belt. I don't really know how long, but. Every day I'll get up, I'm not going to drink today. You know, that's how I do it on a daily basis. But, you know, if I drink before the end of the day, I don't think I will, but you never know. But they reckon, I call it a slip.
Yeah.
They reckon you think of the slip well before you actually do it. But I don't know how that works. I mean, I just don't want to drink today.
It could kill you, couldn't it, if you had...
No, it could kill me, but because what would happen, my wife would probably stab me in the neck. I mean, my tolerance has dropped a lot, and so if I had the booze, the next thing I'd be asking strangers for coke like I used to, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be that person anymore, you know. Not today, anyway.
Okay, Ozzy. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
This has been an Hachette Digital production of I Am Ozzy, written by Ozzy Osbourne and read by Frank Skinner. Abridged, produced and directed by Strathmore Publishing. Text copyright, Ozzy Osbourne 2009. Production copyright, Hachette Digital 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009. 2009, 2009, 2009, 2009, 2009.